Welcome to Google Meet. Enter the meeting PIN followed by the pound key. Thank you. You're muted because a lot of people are on this call. Press *6 to unmute.
Very, try to be very articulate and polite. And so, of course, I was like, okay, I'm going to be fine because I act a certain way. And, of course, that has absolutely nothing to do with it. The way people perceive you, not up to you. My parents taught me, cops are friends, you're supposed to, they're here to protect you. But all I'm seeing is the opposite. So how can I not be afraid when I feel like I'm being hunted? When I feel like I'm there to fill a quota?
We are in a so-called free society. And as a black man, we literally don't.
Part of being a person of color in America.
And there's a certain comfortability associated with that, because if I know that something is inevitable, then I know how to deal with it. Fortunately, I've had parents who have said, this is what you do.
Mom and Dad, I'll be fine because you did a good job raising me. You gave me all the resources and the time, the blood, sweat, and tears to make me a good man, an honorable man, and the foundation to survive in this country.
I want you to know that I will act in an appropriate manner and do everything that you told me to do, because I do love you, and I know that everything you say is not for a reason and not just to talk, and I love you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Michelle. So the reason I like to show that video is because it out and reconcile racism. The added weight of having to try to do that with all the other things that we have to do just in the universe of trying to be a kid and trying to grow up. You have this added pressure, this very adult pressure, and you have kids very young who have to try to figure out how to navigate racism every single day. For those kids who don't have to worry about that, who don't have to think about that, who don't have to experience that, there's a real level of privilege in that. But for some kids, they have to start thinking about it, and they have to start thinking about it incredibly early, and it doesn't end for them. It becomes an everyday event or an everyday occurrence. Curious, as you all watch the video, we're curious about some of your reactions to the video.
I was really moved by the child, I think he was 10, who was like trying to reassure that he wasn't going to do harm. And it makes me, I think the reason that stuck out to me so much is oftentimes like we as adults in society and institutions, the way we structure them, put so much more responsibility on kids to be the adults than we do on the adults to be the adults. And that just like really resonated with me as a teacher.
Thank you. Any other reactions?
I mean, it's heartbreaking. That's like looking at my baby boy. Yeah. And him saying he'll do all the right things and knowing that sometimes that it won't matter.
It's also kind of heartbreaking when you have a kid that's just trying to go to school, and when he's going from building to building to attend classes, that he gets stopped because of that.
Just the thought of, being young and having to carry something that it's not their fault. It's not, growing up thinking that, you've done something wrong. So now you have to prove yourself like all the time for that. I don't know, it's just not right.
Anyone else? All right. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this works. Ellie and Eric occurred, and I can't share my screen. Hopefully it allows me to share my screen. Let's see. There we go. All right, can everybody see the screen? Here we go. All right, so everybody can see the screen. So, good. So, kind of an overview of this evening of what we're going to get into. So, welcome. Again, thank you all for being here this evening and giving me the opportunity. In a moment, we're going to go over our ground rules just to kind of guide our conversation this evening. We're going to go through a definition of terms so to make sure that we're kind of speaking the same language this evening and beyond. We're going to do an activity called Name 5 that I think you'll find kind of actually even fun, but very interesting. And then we'll talk about kind of why we're doing the activity. We're going to talk about the pitfalls of blindness, color and otherwise, and the importance of seeing the whole person. We're going to dive into some data around racial and cultural disparity, and we're going to look at the question about how inclusive are we really. Maybe some things in here that are eye-opening, maybe some things that you aren't aware of. After we go through the data, we're going to take a break. We're going to come back and we're going to do an activity around self-reflection. I'm going to ask you some questions and ask you to jot down some information, and really just for your own benefit, that we're not going to share with each other, but just for you to think about and have in place. We're going to dive into talking about implicit and explicit bias and really talking about how we learn kind of the origin of our stereotypes and microaggressions. And then we're specifically going to dive into stereotypes and do an activity that, again, I think you'll enjoy and find some insight in. We're going to dive into microaggressions, which is kind of the manifestation, how we demonstrate our bias, how we demonstrate our bias and the stereotypes that we've learned. After we go through the exercise, we're going to talk a little bit about ways to address microaggressions and to be an ally. And then we're going to close talking about those 3 letters: silence is acceptance. Is everybody good? All right. So first, Moving into our ground rules. Oops. So first, our basic understandings. Understanding first and foremost that diversity is strength. However, diversity is only strong if we take advantage of it. Diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences, diverse viewpoints and perspectives and ideas. It's about taking advantage of all those things in a room. Otherwise, your diversity is wasted. Understanding that prejudice is learned. Nobody comes out of the womb biased or bigoted, but we start learning bias and we start learning prejudice at a very early age. Kids start exhibiting racial bias as early as 3 years of age. Understanding that this is a process, so that in the 2.5 or 3 hours or so that we have this evening, we're not going to solve the world's isms. We're going to plant some seeds for future discussion, but the idea that we're going to solve like 401 years of systemic racism in the 3-hour conversation is a little much, so I don't put that pressure on myself, nor do I put it on you. Understanding that we all have prejudice and bias. Every single human being. Anybody who claims that they are without prejudice or bias is lying. You are lying to yourself and you're lying to other people. Understanding as well that there is no such thing as a good stereotype. Even stereotypes that are perceived as positive put people in boxes and potentially set them up to fail if they don't live up to that particular stereotype. The working together piece. That's about your universe beyond tonight. I mean, you know, your charge is to create safe environments, learning environments for the young people in this community. How do you work together to do that? What is the environment that you want every child to walk into every single day? What is the access and the opportunity that you want those children to have? And then the last piece, change is always difficult and slow, but the reality is change is always possible. People put time and resources into the things that they care about, and they simply don't put the time and the resources into the things that they don't. So if creating an inclusive environment and creating a safe environment for youth to learn is important, you put the time and resources in. If it's not, you won't. It's that simple. Same thing with this evening. If this workshop is relevant and matters to you, you invest in and engage, you'll get something out. If it doesn't matter to you and this isn't a subject that you care about, you're not getting anything out of it. It's just real. Our 4 agreements of courageous conversation. I borrowed these from a gentleman by the name of Glenn Singleton, who wrote 2 volumes of a book called Courageous Conversations About Race. If you've never had a chance to read, I encourage you to do so. His first is stay engaged. In other words, stay with us. Resist the urge to do other stuff tonight. Pay attention to what's going on. And most importantly, pay attention to what's going on in your head as things get introduced. Self-awareness is incredibly important in this work. The second part of this is expect discomfort. It's my mission tonight to move you out of your comfort zone a bit. I'm a firm believer that there is no movement without friction, so we may have some. The third piece, speak your truth. It is not my expectation that you agree with everything that comes out of my mouth this evening. It is not my expectation that I agree with everything that comes out of yours or that you agree with each other. The hope is that you're open to seeing things through different viewpoints, different perspectives, and different lenses. Whether you agree or not, trying to find the logic in what other people think and feel and believe. The more lenses that I can see the world through, the broader my perspective. The broader my perspective, the more I understand. The biggest thing that I understand in that circumstance, though, is that the more that I learn, the more I need to know. And then the last piece, as it says, expect and accept non-closure. In our organization at Community Action, we talk about this work as a journey, not a destination. Cultural competency or cultural equity is a circumstance where you're always learning and you're always growing. Cultures evolve and change. Things that were cultural norms change. Differences happen. So you're always in the flow of learning as cultures move forward. And you have to be open to that process of lifelong learning. There are no experts in this. There may be people a little further along on their personal and professional journey, but again, I'd like to meet the person that claims that they're an expert, because I have a lot of questions for them. Is everybody okay so far? All right. Let's dive into our definition of terms, shall we? Our first term is culture. It's the basis for much of what we're going to talk about this evening and beyond. And this is the one of the few times I'm actually going to read something from actually reading from the PowerPoint, but as it says, culture is the sum of attitudes, customs, and beliefs that distinguishes one group of people from another. The people that we grow up with and the environments that we grow up in significantly influence the way that we see ourselves and the way that we see the world. Culture is relevant, it matters. Why else is culture important? As it says, culture impacts belief systems, behavior, and communication. We learn those things from the people who are our nurturers and caregivers. We learn those things from the environments that we grow up in. And as our world expands, we learn more and we learn differently, but the things that we learn as a child and the things that we learn as a young person stick with us. Our caregivers have a tremendous amount of influence on us. The people who nurture us through our youth and young adulthood have a tremendous impact on the way that we see the world and the way that we see ourselves. This term, cultural competence. In the simplest of terms, cultural competence means simply the ability to engage and interact with the person sitting across from you, regardless of difference. The ability to make connection and build relationships. Understand that cultural competence is different than cultural knowledge. You can have a great deal of knowledge and understanding about a certain culture or a certain group. You can study a certain culture or a certain group. But if you don't have the ability to interact and engage and build relationships, that cultural knowledge is wasted. Competence is the importance. Cultural humility. Again, in the simplest terms, think about it as, we're going to do this because we're Wisconsin folks. I can be a Packer fan and celebrate being a Packer fan without saying anything disparaging or disrespectful about Bear fans. I can celebrate my culture and my community without saying anything negative or disrespectful about somebody else's cultural community. It really is understanding that my culture is great and awesome and spectacular, and I'm going to celebrate that. But somebody else can feel that same way about their culture as well, and then respecting that their feeling about their culture and their community also. I know for you Packer fans, that's really hard. Next piece, diversity. This is a term that we throw around a lot. We give people diversity awards. We have dinners and banquets about it. We talk about this term often. And diversity is important. Different ideas, different viewpoints, different perspectives, different walks of life, all coming into space to solve a problem, all coming into space to live together and work together, all coming into space to make a community. But diversity is only maximized by this: inclusion. Inclusion is action. It is the active practice of making sure that everyone has a space and a voice at the table. We talk about it here like in terms of diversity is inviting everybody to the dance. Inclusion is getting everybody on the dance floor dancing together. We have to work towards inclusion. I grew up in this community. Beloit's a diverse community. It was a privilege to grow up in this community and have friends from different backgrounds and different experiences. Where we have always struggled and we continue to struggle is with inclusion. How do we make sure that everyone has a voice and place at the table? How do we make sure that all of us have access and opportunity, equitable access and opportunity? It doesn't mean that we're all going to succeed, but it does mean that the opportunity is there for all. Inclusion. Everybody good with those? All right. One last term, and then I'm going to stop talking and we're going to jump into an activity. My last term is intersectionality. And I'll put this slide up to kind of demonstrate. In the simplest of terms, intersectionality are all the things that come together to make us us. All the things that make us the special, unique, awesome, creative, amazing individuals that we are. That's intersectionality at its best. It's the celebration of race and gender and history and heritage and education and ethnicity and language and all those things that are amazing about us. Intersectionality at its worst is when we take one aspect of all the things that make us us, and we decide to dismiss somebody because of that, and we ignore the rest of that human being. I can't talk to you because you're old. I'm not going to talk to you because we're a different religion. I can't connect with you because we're different sexual orientations. I'm going to dismiss you because you're brown or because you're white. It's taking all those other things, all the unique things about us, and dismissing all of it. What intersectionality helps us understand is that any one of these things is a loose binder. Race is a very loose binder. Just because two people are the same skin color doesn't mean that they have anything else in common. Just because two people are the same age doesn't mean that they have anything else connected. Just because two people are the same religion or speak the same language or have the same education. All these things individually are very loose binders. Yet, based on one of these aspects or one of these components, we build so many things into people about. We see the color of somebody's skin and we decide a bunch of things about them. We see somebody's age and we've already labeled them. We find out somebody's sexual orientation or their gender identity and we decide that they're a certain way, without giving them a chance to demonstrate all the other amazing things. We label people before they've had a chance to show us. We name people before they've had a chance to tell us what their name is. We decide who people are and what they deserve before they've had a chance to show that they're deserving. That's intersectionality at its worst. Everybody good there? All right. Move on to proofs. There we go. You go back. Our first activity of the evening. You all actually should have gotten a worksheet, but if you don't have the worksheet, you can do this on the fly the way I have it. So essentially, this is the way this activity called Name 5 works. I have a list of ethnic, racial, and cultural groups. I'm going to choose one at a time. And I'm going to give you 60 seconds to write down 5 prominent individuals from that racial or ethnic group that I chose. They can be living or dead, but they have to be real, not fictional. I had some English teachers try to sneak some fictional characters in on me at one point. The other caveat for the list is that those individuals cannot be athletes, musicians, actors, or entertainers. Everybody understand? So I'm going to pick.
What if there's some intersectionality there, Mark? What if it's like an athlete who's also an author and an activist?
We're going to go with the thing that brought them to fame first.
Okay, got it.
Yep, that's a good, very good question, and thank you for asking it. All right, so does everybody understand the rules? I'm going to choose, and we're going to do several of these, and then we'll talk about my method, why we're doing it. But the first category I'm going to choose is very simple. It's the first one on the list. So get your pen ready. In 60 seconds, I want you to write down 5 prominent Americans, starting now. And stop. All right. 5. Raise your hand if you got 5. Pretty much everybody, right? So my trick to this one is I just named 5 presidents. Does anybody have names other than president? All right, who else? Everybody? All right, let's start with John. What do you got other than president?
I just Ben Franklin and Tom Clancy.
All right. All right, who else other than president?
I had Susan.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay, Megan. Fauci.
Oh, okay. Daniel Fauci. All right. Okay, Megan, go ahead.
Hers is better. No, I wrote Susan B. Anthony.
Okay, Susan B. Anthony. Who else had their hand up? They got 5. All right, so Amy, go ahead. What you got?
Besides presidents, Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, Congressman John Lewis, Ethel Hedgeman Lyle, and Dr. Charles Drew.
All right. Maria?
I had Hillary Clinton. I had Susan B. Anthony too, and I had Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Okay. All right. Who else had their hand up at 5? Spencer?
Jeff Skiles and Chuck Yeager were mine.
All right. And Kyle, who'd you have within the president?
I had 4 presidents and Ben Franklin.
Okay. What about you, Dean?
Dean's our recorder.
Okay. All right. All right. So everybody get set. Round 2. We're going to go, I guess I'll go in order for right now, but I'm going to bounce eventually. 5 prominent Latino or Latina Americans starting now. Stop. 5s? Any 5s in the list? Raise your hand if you got a 5. Maria, read your list.
I have Cesar Chavez, Sonia Sotomayor, Roberto Clemente, Silvia Mendez, Helen Ochoa.
Clemente is hard to give you because he was an athlete first before he became an activist. Don't get me wrong, I love Roberto Clemente. He's one of my favorite people of all time, but he did become famous for being a baseball player first. So I'll give you like 4.5. Anybody else have 5s on that list? 4s? Go ahead, Amy.
I have Cesar Chavez, Maria Teresa Kumar, Miriam Jimenez Roman, and Alicia Mendez.
Okay. What about 3s? All right. Go ahead, Megan.
I had Sotomayor, Cesar Chavez, and Yunot Diaz.
Okay. 2s? 1s? All right. So Kyle, John, and Stephanie. Kyle, who'd you have?
I had Cesar Chavez.
Okay. John, who'd you have?
I drew a big blank all the way through. I had Marco Rubio.
Okay. Excellent. That's my secret is I do politicians. Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio. Yeah, that's what I use. Stephanie, who'd you have?
Cesar Chavez.
All right. Okay. So collectively, we did not do as well. Kudos to Maria and to Amy. Don't worry about it. There's redemption coming. All right. Next category. 5 prominent Asian or Pacific Island Americans. Starting now. Uh-oh. Oh, did I lose everybody?
We're here.
Okay, so everybody's working on the list? Sorry, my screen froze for a second. Keep working. There's nothing to see here. And stop. All right, 5s, 4s. Amy, who you got?
All right, so I have Representative Macy Hirona from Hawaii, Mrs. Fujikawa, who I think is very prominent. She's the best 6th grade teacher ever. Jean Kwan, former mayor of Oakland, and President or Vice President-elect Kamala Harris.
Excellent. All right, anybody else get 4? What about 3s? 2s? All right, we got 2. So, John, who you got?
I'm embarrassed because this is my heritage, but I had my grandma and my dad.
You know what? I'm going to give you those because they're important to you. And your dad was very important in this community. Maria, who you got?
I had Kamala Harris, and I have Jude Karam. He's the co-founder of YouTube.
Okay.
And then I also have my friend Fai Shu. He's a very prominent insurance agent in the community. So.
All right. So no Daniel Inouye, World War II veteran and senator. No Amy Tan, famous author. No Lisa Ling, famous journalist. Vera Wang, famous fashion designer. All right. Okay, crew. We're going to skip a couple. We're going to reset. We're going to bounce around. And we're going to do 5 prominent African Americans, starting now. And stop. How many 5s on our list there? Say just about everybody. All right. If you have one or both of the Obamas on your list, you only get half a point. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. All right. Let's hear some people who are on your list. Who wants to start?
I'll start. I have Hiram Revels, who was one of the first African American senators and the first president of Alcorn State University. James Baldwin, Shirley Chisholm, the first black woman to run for president. Katherine Johnson, NASA scientist. And while we're on science, Henrietta Lacks.
Excellent. All right. Who else has got 5? Wants to show it off? Go ahead, John.
Michelle Obama, Martin Luther King, Jesse Jackson, Condoleezza Rice, and Kamala Harris.
All right. All right. Who else has got 5? Excellent work. Hi, Kyle.
Okay, I have Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, and President Barack Obama.
All right. Maria?
I have Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, Barack Obama, Michelle Obama. I have Mark Perry and Denny Evans, prominent community members too.
Yeah, I don't count.
Okay.
You're like a third. You're like 1/10 of a point for me.
I should get like extra credit for that. Come on.
I agree with that. She should get extra credit.
That wasn't bad. Spencer, who you got?
I'll just say the ones that haven't been kind of said already. Mandela Barnes.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest of I have already been said.
Okay. Stephanie?
I'm cheating right now, and I'm telling you I am, because I cannot. It's just, well, I have Barack and Michelle Obama, Oprah Winfrey, and Kamala Harris, but was it George Washington Carver?
Yeah, George Washington Carver. Yep.
Okay, that's it. I couldn't.
Okay.
I was trying to Google it. Okay.
Yeah. Oprah never gets questioned because she's Oprah. So that's just where that goes. We just deal with that. All right. We're going to do a couple more. We're going to do 5 Native or Indigenous Americans, starting now. Stop. How many people got 5 on that list? Any 5s? Okay. Any 4s? 1 4? Oh, 2 4s? Any 3s? All right, before I ask you to name your list, does anybody have Pocahontas on their list? Sacagawea, Chief Joseph, Chief Blackhawk, Red Cloud, Crazy Horse. All right, Megan, I think your list might be the most diverse. Go for it.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, mine includes Sitting Bull, which might fall into that category. But
I was going to say that, yeah.
I know, so I don't think I count. But I put Louise Eldridge, who's an author, and Winona LaDuke, activist.
Okay, excellent. Who else has a couple of others on their list?
I have David O'Connor, works closely with DPI, Dr. Janelle Lupke, and Congresswoman Sharice Davidson of Kansas.
Excellent. All right. Anybody else want to share the list? Go ahead, Stephanie.
I have a question. I couldn't hear what you said, Mark, when you were referring to the Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse and Sacagawea.
Oh, just listing them to see if anybody had them on their list.
Oh, okay. And then I had Geronimo.
Okay. Yep. Wanted to make sure that was, yep, good. All right. Last one. And I'll explain to you why this last one is the one we're using after we get through it. But the last one is 5 prominent Catholic Americans, starting now. And stop. So, the secret to this one is to just name Kennedys. Did anybody get any 5s? Stephanie, you got 5? Nope. Oh, you got 4? Amy, you got 5? Go ahead.
Should I list them?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So Pope Francis, President-elect Joe Biden, President Kennedy, and Mother Teresa.
You get 3. Mother Teresa's not American, neither is the Pope.
Oh, I missed the American Catholic. All right,
Yeah.
my bad.
That's all right. That's all right. Anybody else get 3 or 4, 5? Maria, go right ahead.
I have Cardinal Sean Patrick O'Malley, Sonia Sotomayor, Joe Biden, and then J.F. Kennedy.
Excellent. All right, who else had their hand up? Okay, go ahead, Stephanie.
Geez, I was raised Catholic. This is sad. Well, I had John Kennedy, Eleanor Kennedy. Is Rudy Giuliani Catholic?
I'm not sure.
Okay, and then I have the Pope, who is not American.
All right, that's all right. Megan, go for it.
I'm guessing that Rod Blagojevich is Catholic. I'm pretty sure he is. John F. Kennedy and Joe Biden.
Okay. All right. Not bad. Anybody else? So those of you who know me know that I am a history nerd, especially like the history of American and global politics and government. So one of the most interesting elections in U.S. history was the 1960 presidential election. In that election, one of the biggest debates of that election was whether or not people would vote for John F. Kennedy because he was Catholic. Up until that time, there had never been a Catholic president of the United States. And there were people who did not vote for John F. Kennedy simply because he was Catholic. It goes back to the piece that we were talking about earlier about intersectionality. Out of all the things about that human being, the one thing people focused on was his religion. And people decided because of that, that he was not worthy to be president. People were literally in fear of what direction somebody who was Catholic was going to take the country in. And it was major debate and discussion all through the 1960 election and leading up to the 1960 election. So it's interesting as you think about the history of things and how we've evolved. Fast forward to 2008 and the conversation switches from Catholic to African American. Fast forward to 2016 and the 2016 and it switches from African American to whether or not we'll elect a woman president. 2020, whether or not we'll elect a biracial woman vice president. So it's interesting how those conversations have evolved, but in 1960, that was the most intriguing thing to me about that election, is that it was a major national debate. And people took sides simply based on John Kennedy's faith. Nothing else that he stood for, simply his religion. So, back to all of you, just in general, what do you think about the activity? How do you feel about doing it?
I gotta say, the hardest thing about this is, like, I mean, it kind of draws attention that, like, our community really focuses on athletes, musicians, and artists. And when you start asking to find people outside of that, you really start to draw a blank on it.
Mm-hmm. And Spencer, your point is actually one of the reasons why I use this activity. Years ago, when we were operating our high school mentoring program, I always did a history lesson for the kids. And one of the lessons I did for the kids one evening is I asked them to list for me 20 prominent African-American men or women, no athletes, no actors, no entertainers. And the kids couldn't do it. These were sophomores, juniors, and seniors at Blue Oak Memorial, about 25 kids in the room. And the kids could not make the list. In fact, they got mad at me because I wouldn't let them use athletes, actors, and entertainers. And then, foolishly, I got mad at them. But then I realized that they only know what they're exposed to and what they've been taught. So what does that say about the fact that sophomores, juniors, and seniors in high school got to that place and can't list artists and scientists and writers and mathematicians of color? It was a big commentary on what we're learning in school and what we're learning at home, and understanding that it's hard for kids we can tell kids they can be anything we want. We can tell them anything. You can be this, you can be that, but if we can't give them evidence and proof, give them visuals of people who are doing that, it's hard for them to grasp that it's possible and it's feasible. Oh, John, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say and comment that, I mean, it goes to show basically in America what people know about and what they understand is what sells. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you really think about it. And it also, I mean, as you were saying that, you think about, I think a lot of kids, they look at pro athletes. Mm-hmm. And I think it's extremely critical, and even more so when you think about the professional athletes, the ones that have really risen to the top. And, like the one that comes to mind to me is Patrick Mahone right now, and just how he's carried himself, but as a great role model to a lot of young kids. And I think it's so critical that obviously that it puts them at a higher stage because they are a big focal point within the United States. But I go back to what sells. I mean, scientists don't sell. People right. in marketing don't sell. It's the athletes and people. It's the rock stars and the singers and the musicians, like you said. They're the ones that get all the attention.
Yeah. And you think about how limiting that is at times, and not just for our kids of color, but for all of our kids that, and don't get me wrong, everybody that knows me knows I'm a sports fanatic, but so it's not to vilify athletes at all. But thinking about, I'll give you an example. So in high school, I was an aspiring writer, and I was editor of the school newspaper, but I was a senior before I read my first novel in school anyway, my first novel by an African-American author. We read Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man in AP English. So up until that time, my entire school career, other than like the occasional rollout of a Langston Hughes poem during Black History Month, either We Real Cool or A Dream Deferred, because those were the two, I didn't experience or witness any other authors of color, period. So that also means that other kids of color didn't see authors and writers of their race and ethnicity, and it also means that white students didn't either and weren't exposed. So that limiting viewpoint or perspective, that's the norm. It was life-changing for me to read Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man and to see that an African-American man could write the quintessential American novel. That was amazing. I read that novel first when I was 15. I still read it at least once a year, and I'm 48 now. But that exposure is relevant and it matters. So what we expose our kids to and what we expose ourselves to. I mean, think about where do you all get your news from? What are your news sources?
Like online, like the New York Times and NPR and like just like the online versions of it.
Okay. Where else do people get their news from?
About 2 minutes on the Beloit Daily News, and the rest is all CNBC for me.
Okay. Where else?
Sirius
Go ahead, Amy.
XM, Urban View, MSNBC, CNN, NPR.
Okay.
I stay local and I do like NBC 15.
All right. Where else?
I do my phone, which has a variety.
Okay. Stephanie, your phone? All right. So what's the one none of you were mentioning?
From different people around us. Like I get news from, I get articles that are promoted by organizations that I follow, from people that I talk to that are like in my circle, and usually people who I share common interests and identities with.
Right. So your news is coming in from people who share your same viewpoint, your same perspective, and validate your viewpoint and your perspective on some level, right?
Oh yeah, for the most part, yeah. Unless I make an effort, like, oh, I really want to understand, a different view on this. Like, I'll seek that out. But yeah, typically, but because of that intersectionality too, I'm sure all of us have people in our circles that don't share every common value or every common perspective. But it's like limited, right? Like it's I wouldn't say it's a complete echo chamber, but probably for most of us, unless we seek it out, there's not a ton of diversity in perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly. Stephanie, you had your hand up. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I just recently started trying to purposely put on my phone different, like newspapers or affiliations that are opposites, because I find it interesting to see where overlaps are in things, and I just kind of like to know the different viewpoints.
Okay. John, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree with what Megan had said, and I think what you were alluding to. You look at Facebook and all the social media. If anybody watched the documentary, Social Media, I mean, that kind of filtered right into that, the idea that we are basically trained and over and over, and we like the people that we like to hear from, that continue to reinforce our beliefs or what we believe we are, and we close out those that aren't in that page. And I think this is a major issue. I've always been, and I'll always be. I'm anti-social media because I just think that it's been such a negative thing. Is all the positives that it brings to our society, it brings so many more negatives, in my opinion. And that's just my opinion. I mean, I think there's a lot of good things that it does do, but I think that it just reinforces, and we see that. My wife and I, we talk about this a lot, about various people, and I just, like I said, I don't follow anything on Facebook because I just don't want to buy into that. It's unfortunate. I think it's a sad part of our society right now.
All right. Thanks for sharing that. And Maria, go ahead.
I was just going to mention that I think sometimes we kind of follow what, the news that would mostly relate to you. So I hear or I view a lot of like Univision, Telemundo, because they provide like different news, not just, United States news, but like news from my country, from Mexico. So, I guess, you kind of just follow the commonalities, within yourself.
Well, and if you think about like the 24-hour mainstream American news cycle, are you getting a lot of stories from a lot of different places with varied viewpoints and opinions? Or are you getting like the same 6 stories told from like the MSNBC perspective, the Fox perspective, the CNN viewpoint? I mean, it's just that idea of we're kind of recycling the news but we're talking about it from a different aspect. Or are you getting a lot of stuff? What are you getting? Go ahead, Maria. Your hand's still up.
The same. I think, you know, if you turn into, you know, pretty much the same line of news, you know, you'll get the same stuff, you know, just with maybe different wording, but it's pretty much the same. And I think it's only because you're in agreement or you kind of follow that, you know, validation kind of to what you're perceiving or what you're expecting the news to actually say.
Yeah. Go ahead. Thank you, Maria.
My wife and I always have sort of a practice where we always try to find the counter to anything that's said, because I think that, you know, everybody has an opinion out there, and I think it's critical to understand what the other side is thinking or saying, so that you can come up with your own perspective, but looking at it from all sides. And that's really what I look at. So whenever we hear something, or if we happen to read something, or she reads something on Facebook, we always say she's always researching and trying to look at the other side of things to figure out what the other side is thinking.
Thank you. Megan, go ahead.
I was just going to say something that we talk to our students about a lot, that I hope adults are paying attention to too, is like the validity of sources, because not all perspectives are equal. So, John, I do the same thing, and I actually like try to be very intentional, at least politically, to include people in my circles. Like I have good relationships with people who I share values with, but are politically differently minded in some ways. So I definitely appreciate what you're saying. I think that we also have to be really conscientious of what media we're consuming and where it comes from and why it's being produced and who's profiting from it. And we have to ask ourselves, like, how valid is what we're reading or watching?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Megan. I think that's relevant also. It's where we're getting it from, who we're getting it from, how much of it are we getting, you know? So I'm going to share a quick story with you all, because I talk about my Beloit Memorial days, whether you want to hear it or not, because I have a platform when I can. So my favorite class of all time at Beloit Memorial was my current events class that I had to take my senior year. And I did not want to take this class. So we get into class, we have the first day, and we get a quiz. And the quiz is about all these like global, I don't know, like what's going on in East Timor and where's Kuala Lumpur. And I was like, I don't know where East Timor is, in New Jersey or something. But we get these quiz about these, you know, what's happening, what's going on with the Khmer Rouge. I mean, it was all these really interesting questions that none of us had any idea about being from Beloit, Wisconsin. And so the first 3 weeks of this class, we get these quizzes on Monday. And we're all failing these quizzes. And most of us in this class are ridiculous overachievers, and we couldn't handle it. So I happened to notice on one of the quizzes that we failed that not only was the teacher putting the answer on, but he was also giving us the source of where the information came from. So one Sunday afternoon, I called a bunch of my friends in that class. We went down to the Beloit Public Library, because this was pre-internet, 1988, so sorry. Went down to the Beloit Public Library, and I said, you go read the Christian Science Monitor. You go read U.S. News and World Report. You go read Newsweek. You go read the New York Times. You go read this one, and I'm going to read this. And we're going to come back in a couple hours, and we're going to summarize every prominent international story that was in those papers. So we get to class on Monday, and we all ace that test, ace the quiz. And we're like, aha, we figured it out. We gotcha. And so a couple more weeks go by, and we keep doing this, and we're like smiling and all, and the teacher's smiling at us and all happy and excited. And I'm like, why are you smiling? We tricked you. We beat you. And he's like, no, you didn't. I gotcha. What I wanted you to do is exactly what you did. I wanted you to figure out what these sources are, because I wanted you to go read these things, because my ultimate goal for you was to understand that at 16 years old from Beloit, Wisconsin, the world is much bigger than Beloit, Wisconsin, and that we are connected to people globally and connected to things globally that may impact us currently or in the future that we may not even be aware of. And it was incredibly eye-opening, because we were like, what do you mean you're happy that we did that? That's not the way it's supposed to work. We won. But no, it's incredible the way that he did that and let us let us walk into his trap, but we figured it out. And then we just kept doing it. And then after a while, it became kind of a norm to read those things on the weekends. And we developed a taste for it in high school and in college. Imagine, I mean, I started listening to public radio when I was I think I was a junior or senior. Imagine being a 16-year-old black kid riding around City of Blow with your windows down and you're blasting NPR. It probably got me laughed at a little bit, but I listen to NPR to this day. But it was that introduction to understanding that the world was much bigger, that there was a much bigger global impact, and that I had a role to play in it. And it was so eye-opening for all of us. And the lesson there for all of us as educators is, how do we create those similar experiences for all of our students? How do we give them those opportunities to learn and grow and discover so that they understand that the world is a whole lot bigger than Beloit, Wisconsin? And don't get me wrong, not that Beloit, Wisconsin is not a great, fantastic place. I love my hometown, but there's a lot more to the world than just this. And how do we work to make sure we're exposing them to it? Last comments about this activity? Reactions? Yeah, I didn't do this just to make fun of what you didn't know. So I want you to know that, because that's all of us. I mean, it's hard. We all fall short in these circumstances. But it also speaks to, again, what we expose ourselves to and what we expose our young people to. And it's critically important to remember the world is bigger, and there's so much more to it. So, all right, everybody good? We're going to move on. We're going to do a couple more things, and then we're going to take a break. So we're going to switch topics and talk about this subject, the subject of blindness. How many of you have ever had someone come up to you and say, oh, you know, I don't see you as a woman, I just see you as my friend, or I don't see you as black, or I don't see you as Asian, I just see you as my buddy, you know, and I think we had that experience before, we've heard about that experience. And I think the idea of that is trying to humanize or trying to make a connection, but in reality, that statement, I don't see you as, to me, the minute that you start saying that statement, I have to stop you. Because why do you need to tell me that you don't see it? What that says to me is that you see it. If there's no reason to try to deny that it's not, that something isn't there. So don't come up to me and be like, Mark, I don't see you as a black person, I just see you as my coworker. I'm always really skeptical. Because for one, for practical purposes, you're not missing 300 pounds of Hershey chocolate brown. I'm right here. Two, for other rational reasons, it's important to see it. You don't get to deny the skin color. I don't get to deny my skin color, so why should you get to? The other part of that is, what's wrong with seeing it? You know, it's part of me. It's part of my humanity. As I say to people all the time, my skin color doesn't define me, but it is part of the definition. It's part of the intersectionality. It's part of the stuff that makes me me. And it might be the most, other than the fact that I'm incredibly handsome, it might be the most visible part of me. So see the whole person. In professions like helping professions, it's important to see the whole person for another reason. There are things that impact me because of the color of my skin that may not impact you. There are things that impact you because of the color of your skin or your ethnicity or your gender or your age or your weight or your size that may not impact me. But if I don't see the whole person and take all of those things into account, then how can I completely help you overcome barriers? If race is a barrier to success, if gender is a barrier to success, if age is if any of these things are barriers to success, and my job is to help you overcome barriers, then I need to see you as the whole person and see the things that impact you potentially. That's where that's important. And it's not like you have to make a big deal out of seeing somebody's race or religion or ability, but understanding that it's not a secret. I know what color I am. A person in a wheelchair knows that they're in a wheelchair. It's not a secret. So instead of burning a great deal of energy trying to pretend like we don't see something that we obviously see, just acknowledge it and move on. And we don't, like, it doesn't have to be verbal or anything. It just be a click in your brain. But again, see the whole person. Understand that the whole person matters. Understand that every aspect of that human being is relevant. When you dismiss my skin color, you dismiss an aspect of me. And on some level, it's dehumanizing. And when you pretend like you don't see something that we both know you obviously do, it's also patronizing, and it insults my intelligence. So let's not do that either. It's there. However prominent a role it is in my life, that's my self-determination. But it's there. So see that person. It just, I don't know, for some reason we have been taught, or some of us have learned, not that seeing difference is bad, or even just talking about difference is bad. And the reality of it is, different isn't good or bad, it just is. And as much as we talk about, and I'm a big proponent of finding and celebrating commonalities, it's just as important that we celebrate difference. It's just as important that we recognize the things that make us unique and special. There are things that bring us together because we have them in common, and there are things that we admire and respect about each other that are different. People have different skill sets than I have, and I admire and respect that because I don't have it. People have had different life experiences than I've had, and so they can share those with me, and I can see them through those lenses because I haven't had them. And we do this either or thing with it, like it's same or different, and it really needs to be a lens of and both. Yes, always celebrate the things that we have in common, but yes, recognize and celebrate the difference. Because that difference may have a huge impact on something. That different lens, that different viewpoint, that different life experience, bringing something to the table that I don't have or that you don't have, may be the difference in solving a major problem. So we have to get to that understanding. And first and foremost, we have to let go of what I like to call the myth of sameness. That idea that everybody's the same and we treat everybody the same. Because that's not real. Everybody's not the same. You are all very different people with very different viewpoints and perspectives. You have a common goal, which is to uplift and educate the kids in this community and the families in this community. But the manner in which we go about that, you all have different ideas about how to do so. And you're all coming from different life experiences, personal experiences, and professional experiences. But that's not a bad thing. That's a positive. One of you or two of you or three of you may see something that somebody else doesn't. That's a major solution that helps move our kids forward. So how do we celebrate and accept each other's differences? How do we uplift people's differences and make people feel good about those differences? You know, it's unfortunate at times where that stigma that different is gotten, that othering that we do about people. Because ultimately, yes, the one thing that binds us is we're all human beings. Those different qualities that make us us, though. We can celebrate the commonality of humanity and still celebrate the difference of the individual. And that is not a contradiction. So how do we make sure that we're doing that with ourselves? We're role modeling that as adults, and then we're doing it for our children as well. But again, see the whole person. Acknowledge the whole person. All right. Everybody okay there?
Really quick?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
For me, a big part about that is that accept that we are different and don't try to make me like you and I will return the favor. Don't say, oh, well, you do this, and that doesn't make sense to me, so I want you to be more like that, or that would be easier for me. Like, acknowledge and celebration also includes not trying to remake people, to make you more comfortable.
I think there's a level of truth to that, because sometimes difference breeds discomfort. We have to ask the question, is that discomfort about the person across from me that I'm uncomfortable about, or is that discomfort about me? That's a place where we have to do some self-examination. And I think that plays both ways, because on the one hand, I want to make sure that I'm communicating to people in a manner, or engaging with people in a manner that they understand. But I also want to make sure that I'm doing so in a manner that still allows me to be my authentic self, because that matters to me. I shouldn't have to change, again, and you're right, Amy, I shouldn't have to change the core essence of who I am in order to assimilate or connect or fit in. But again, that's that question about those questions about self. What is it about that person that's making me feel uncomfortable? And is it really about that person, or is it my own stuff? There's a lot of self-examination and self-awareness that goes, and I said this earlier, that goes into this work. My background, my beliefs, my experiences, my values, and how that impacts the way that I see the person sitting across from me. And being fully conscious and aware of those things. And understanding that because of that, because of my backgrounds, experiences, beliefs, biases I've learned, stereotypes I've picked up, that some of that, whether I'm conscious of it or not, does impact the way that I see and treat other people. Which we'll get into more of that later. All right. Any other comments? I see a lot of wheels turning on people's brains. So anytime there's something you want to chime in with, please do. It is more important to me that we have the keep having the conversation that you all want to have than I get through these slides. So Maria, I just saw your hand up.
Yeah. So just to go off of what Amy said, sometimes it's not necessarily changing the person. It's maybe changing the manner that it's presented to help understand other people. I learn differently than I'm going to assume that most of you. I think everyone has their own different way of learning. So I think it's important to understand that whenever, something is questioned or something is said, like, okay, I understand it this way because it was put in different words. It's not necessarily saying that I disagree with the other person. It's just simply saying I could understand better in this manner. And it's not in disagreement to what the other person said, because it could be totally the same thing, but just using different words and maybe a different approach. So it's not going against a person. It's just that's the way that, and I'll say it for myself, that's the way that I understand it better. So it's helping me understand if it's put in a different way. My brain thinks differently than other brains. And sometimes I have to explain myself in many different ways in order to people to understand myself. And I don't mind doing that because I understand that. I'm open-minded that people learn in different manners. Or understand.
Well, and Maria, there's a lot of validity in what you just said, because again, it's understanding the person that's sitting across from you as well. And how can I make a connection, and how can I build a relationship with that person? How can we communicate with each other? And sometimes people have to sit down and work. Sometimes that comes easily, that connection or that relationship comes easily. And sometimes people have to sit down and work through that and figure out how to communicate with each other. And sometimes, and that's just the way. Again, different mindsets, different individuals, different people, different ways of communicating and understanding. But there's nothing wrong with having to sit down and understand each other. In fact, there's value to having to sit down and try to understand each other. So so being able to do that is necessary. That connection is necessary. And again, as you said, understanding that different people have different viewpoints and learn differently, that's just, again, another level of respect for individuality. John, go ahead.
I think Megan's before me.
Oh, okay. Sorry. It's hard to see on the screen who has had their hand up first. Megan, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, it's no problem. I was actually just, the thing that I'm reacting to after listening to you talk here from the article that we read, something that jumped out to me that I thought was really not a difficult idea, but a very powerful idea was toward the end when they talked about, and I tried to write down what they wrote, they talked about how if you're in a position where you're a helper, like a teacher or, in any kind of service position where you're trying to be of service to others, and you yourself are uncomfortable with race or with differences at all, you might think that, okay, well, this is something that I'm going to manage on my own. But the fact that it's something that you struggle with, that you haven't done the work with, creates a barrier between you being able to help somebody, right? So even if your intentions are really good, but you're like, well, I don't really know how to do this work. It makes me uncomfortable. I'm a good person, so I'm just going to be a good helper. You're not. You're creating that barrier. And I think what I wrote down was getting comfortable with race actually removes the barrier. And I just thought that crystallized kind of the work that we're doing here really beautifully, because I know that everybody here, I have great respect for everybody here, and I think highly of everybody here. And I just think it's really cool that we're going to, by doing this work on ourselves and by doing this work as a group, we're going to continue to remove those barriers and increase our lenses and really be able to more authentically, I think, be of service to our community. So I thought it was just kind of beautiful, and I was just reflecting what you were saying, and I just appreciated that part of the article.
No, thank you for that. John, go right ahead.
I have a question. I mean, it's kind of a little bit with what Maria was saying there, but what happens when you're trying to connect with people and one side doesn't, how do I put this? One side doesn't want to listen. They don't want to understand. And they just, it's their way or the highway. And we all have run across this a lot probably over the last few years more than ever. There's always that barrier, and it's almost like, how do you break that down? And I've seen that happen, and I've even seen it with my kids and some of the interactions they've had with other students in the schools, whereby they want to have and I always tell them, I say, you have to address it with these other people and say, when we can have an adult conversation together, then I'll participate. And I think that's one of the things that I look at, and we really strive for, because I always want to listen to other people, but I also want to be listened to, or want people to listen to me and understand and respect me as well. I mean, so what do you do when you don't have that?
John, your question is great. There are points in times in difficult conversation where first and foremost you have to set some rules of engagement, I guess is the best way to put that. And come to some agreements about listening and respecting and being open to viewpoints and perspectives. And if you can't come to those basic agreements, those basic communication agreements, you're kind of hitting your head against the wall. Communication is a two-way street. So if one person is closed to the communication, like I said at the beginning of this workshop, if you're not open to what we have going on tonight, you're not going to get anything out of it. If your mind is already closed to this process, then you're not going to get anything. And the same thing is individual communication. That agreement about first, we're going to listen to each other, and we're going to do active listening. So I'm not only going to listen to you, but I'm going to be like, okay, so I heard you say this. This is where it lands for me. This is what I think you're. So I'm going to explain it back to you, even to make sure that I clearly understand your viewpoint and perspective. And then I'm going to listen and give the other person a chance. Because we're often very fixed in our viewpoints and perspectives, we're not often good at listening to opposing viewpoints. And we have to catch ourselves at times, because we start getting defensive when somebody has a viewpoint that's different than ours. And when we start getting defensive, we stop listening. And we have to get that, and it's practice. I have to drop that thing, that barrier that keeps coming up, that keeps me from not listening, and listen to what the person has to say. Doesn't mean I have to agree, but I'm still trying to find, as I said before, the logic in it. If there's rationale to what you're saying, if it makes sense. I don't have to like it or agree with it, but if I can find the sense in it, it helps me understand. But I have to be open to that first. This is all about being open to that learning from the person sitting across from you. Again, I'm not labeling you. I'm not deciding who you are. I'm understanding from you as opposed to giving you my stuff or landing my stuff on you. And this is about those courageous conversations, quite honestly, with people who you have who we struggle with communicating with, and setting some ground rules about communication, because the frustration that you feel on your end, I guarantee that person feels that same frustration on their end, because you both feel like you're not getting your point across. So how do you draw some rules of engagement and communication with each other so you can both be heard and understood? And some points in times, even in that mix, there are going to be people who we're just not going to connect with. We don't connect with everybody. We don't get along with everybody. Not all personalities gel. Not all mixes of personalities connect with each other. But did you put the effort and energy into it? Did you come to some agreement and understanding? Can you still work to connect and do the things that you need to do? We all work with people professionally that we struggle with. But I trust even the people that I struggle with, that ultimately they have the same goal in mind that I have. They just have a different lens of how to get there. So we have to work together to try to figure that out and see. But it means we have to set some rules of engagement in terms of the way that we communicate with each other. And if we can do that with each other as adults and model that, our kids will have better conflict resolution skills also. So I'm hoping that answered your question, John.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate what you said at the end there about our modeling and being role models for our children. I think that is so critical, and it's a lost art, unfortunately. I think we see it in all circles that the kids take after their parents, and we can see it kind of continuing on. But thank you.
All right. Is everybody ready to move to our next thing? One more thing before we take a break. So we're going to get into some data. As you all know, I love data because I love grant writing and I love doing research. So especially when it comes to issues of race and culture, there's kind of that juxtaposition of what we think we know anecdotally as opposed to what the data tells us. So I've always been taught that no matter what I think anecdotally I think is right or I think is the truth, always seek the data, because it could be that the data backs up what I believe, or it could be that the data blows out of the water what I think. But either way, trust data, and again, as I think as Megan mentioned earlier, as we're talking about trust data from reputable sources. So pulling data from reputable sources to see if what I think I know anecdotally is true, or if it refutes what I do. But either way, trusting that information. So we're going to dive into some data around racial and cultural disparity that I'll share with you. And a lot of the data that I'm sharing with you is youth focused. So, because we're youth focused. First, some demographic trends. According to the Census Bureau, children of color now represent a majority of the children in the United States. That is as of 2018. By the year 2030, the majority of the U.S. labor force will be people of color. And the last one, by mid-century, no single racial or ethnic group will comprise the majority of the U.S. population. By about 2050, 2045, 2050, whites will be about 43% of the U.S. population. So you see that kind of, it's already happened with our youth population, but our adult populations are changing as well. But what does that mean about our institutions? So let's look at a couple things. So first, I looked at the nonprofit sector, my universe. How diverse is it? As it says, only 8% of board members of nonprofits are people of color. Nearly a third of nonprofit boards don't have a single person of color on them. Only 7% of CEOs or executive directors are people of color. You can count on one hand in this community the number of CEOs or executive directors of nonprofits of color that there are in this community. I think I'm one of 3, if that's the truth. I think that's true. I'm either one of 3 or one of 4 out of the 80 or so nonprofit entities in this community. Only 18% of nonprofit staff are people of color. And only 5% of philanthropic organizations are led by people of color. So organizations that give money. So that's nationwide. So then let's see if corporate America is any better. So let's look at the Fortune 500. There are currently 4 African American CEOs in the Fortune 500, 0.8%. Overall, 4% of Fortune 500 CEOs are minorities, just 4%. 21 of the CEOs in the Fortune 500 list are female, only 4.2%. 73 CEOs in the Fortune 500 list are foreign-born. What about board members of Fortune 500 companies? 3.1% Asian Pacific Islander, 3.5% Latino, 7.9% African American, 85.5% of the boards of Fortune 500 companies are white, and only 20% of those board members are women. Our institutions don't seem to be keeping up. So, let's talk about some racial disparity, especially some youth disparity, some disparity nationally. As it says, at least 1 out of every 3 African American, Latino, and American Indian children in the United States lives in a household with an income below the poverty line. Students of color face harsher punishments in school than their white peers, leading to higher numbers of youth of color incarcerated. Black and Hispanic students represent more than 70% of those involved in school-related arrests or referrals to law enforcement. The next one. Currently, African Americans make up 2/5 and Hispanics 1/5 of all confined youth in the United States today. What about Wisconsin? Historically, Wisconsin has the highest or one of the highest graduation rates of its white students in the entire nation. Historically, at a clip of around 96%. Wisconsin graduates historically about 66% of its African American students. That's actually the worst racial disparity in the entire nation. So we'll come back to some more data around race. But I also wanted to look at treatment of students from other backgrounds. So one of the things I did is I pulled some information from the 2019 Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which you're all familiar with. And I looked at some categories around safety and health and well-being and responses, and I'm comparing youth who identify as heterosexual to youth who identify as LGBTQ. And my reason for looking at that was, again, that idea of sameness, that idea that all students are having the similar experiences or all students are being treated the same. Based on this data, that's just simply not the case. So, percentage of students who did not go to school because they felt unsafe at school, much higher for youth who identify as LGBTQ. Percentage of students who were threatened or injured with a weapon on school property, double that for students who identify as LGBTQ. Percentage of students who were ever forced to engage in anything sexual, 2.5 times higher for youth that identify as LGBTQ. Percentage of students who were electronically bullied, double for those youth. Percentage of students who felt sad or hopeless, almost triple for those youth. Percentage of students who seriously considered attempting suicide, 3.5 times. Percentage of students who planned a suicide. Percentage of students who attempted suicide, significantly higher. Percentage of students who were ever the victim of dating violence, significantly higher. Percentage of students who reported that they've been raped. Percentage of students who did something purposely to hurt themselves without wanting to die. Students who are cutting or doing other things to hurt themselves purposely. Percentage of students who've had significant problems with feeling anxious, nervous, tense, scared, or like something bad was going to happen to them. Both of those numbers are way too high for our kids. 45.1% of heterosexual students, 78.3% of students that identify as LGBTQ. Think about just the fear of just walking on school grounds, the fear of what's coming. And my reason for showing that information is because I often hear, every once in a while I'll have a conversation with a teacher and they'll say something like, I can't understand why I can't get this group of students to learn. I treat all my students the same. And my response is always this: that's why you fail, because your students are not the same. Treating students the same and treating students with equity are two different things. Different students with different backgrounds and different experiences coming from different places need different things in order to be successful. And that does not mean that you lower the bar. The bar for success remains the same. What it means is that the manner in which we go about educating that child and supporting that child has to be different to get them to reach that space. So understanding who is in your classroom. And that is a challenge because teachers have 30 kids in a classroom with 30 different personalities and 70 different needs. So how do we wrap around our teachers and our administrators in their buildings to make sure that they have the resources they need to be successful also? It's a challenge every single day, but every child sitting in that space, whether that child is an affluent kid with a high IQ or a homeless kid who hasn't eaten in 3 days, or a low-income kid who is struggling, every kid in that classroom has the right to learn. How do we figure out and make that happen? Last piece of data around youth. So, oh wait, any questions or comments? John, you have your hand up, go ahead. Okay, that's just from the last time? All right. So last piece of data around youth. The Annie E. Casey Foundation. Those of you who are like TV nerds, public television nerds, have probably heard of the Annie Casey Foundation. One of the things that they focus on, though, is they really focus a lot of research and attention on the health and well-being of our children. So one of the things they do is they do this study every few years called the Race for Results. So they take these 12 criteria, or these 12 areas, and they gather data on the health and well-being of all children in each state on these criteria. And then they compile that data and they rank each state based on the health and well-being of their children. And then they break that data down by race and ethnicity. That's Wisconsin. The reason for the differences in numbers, and they're not all 50, is because those are the number of states from the data that they gathered that had enough data for it to be a reputable report. So there's only 26 states that have a high enough population of indigenous people to qualify that report, 43 for Asian Pacific Islander, 49 for Latino, and 44 states for African Americans. So that's why the disparity in the number of states, because they want to make sure they're using tangible data, and all states had enough confluence of a population to measure. Oh, Stephanie, go ahead. You have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mark. So, what is this data telling us specifically? Excuse me.
So the data tells us that if you're a white child in Wisconsin, if you're a white child in the United States, Wisconsin is the 10th best state to live in. If you're white, If you're an African American kid and you live in the United States, Wisconsin is the 41st state in terms of the health and well-being of its children to live in. That's what that data means.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Yep. No, thanks for asking. Megan, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I mean, so we've had these numbers for a long time. The state of Wisconsin has, and I know at least back to 2015. I don't know how much the numbers have changed, but I mean, I came across something similar like 5 years ago, and it makes me wonder. I mean, there's obvious implications for our local school board, and it just like it makes you wonder like what's going on at the state level and like where the priorities are, because I feel, and I'm not at all trying to pass blame. I hope that all of us are taking away ideas for us to discuss like locally as well. But it just like when you talk about priorities, like the system is designed to do what it's doing, right? So even if we don't think it is, like if something is built a certain way to do a certain thing, that's the thing that it does, and this is what our system is doing. And so, you know, I have to ask, like, I think one question that we don't need to answer right now, but that I've written down in my notes to take back to hopefully guide future board discussions is like, to what extent can we change this system locally? And then like, to what extent do we need to advocate like more of a statewide change? Because I think there are some things that might be a little outside of our scope to make like a huge impact, but I think other things we could make a huge impact in. So I'm just kind of reflecting on that, and this isn't new information at all. It's a little depressing to me to see this again, to be honest, and I'm just trying to reflect on how we can do something constructive with it, I guess.
Yeah. A lot of the information I'm presenting is not new. Many of you have seen it before. I mean, and it is that question of what can you do at the local level, what can we do at the state level, and what can we do at the national level to reverse these trends that continue to impact. Here's another one. These are the 5 states with the highest level of inequality between white and black residents. Again, this is data that, like I said, I'm sure you've all seen before, but it continues to remain true. Go ahead, Stephanie, you have your hand up. Or was that from last time? Is your hand still up? Okay. Just trying to make sure I get as people's hands go up that I'm paying attention. But again, at one point, Wisconsin was considered the worst state for African American children to live in, the worst state for African American families to live in, and the most segregated state in the United States. Go ahead, John.
I mean, this is something, I mean, I've read books on it. In fact, I have several books here that I've read. I mean, this goes back for centuries. I mean, well, probably over the last century about the segregation, and specifically, and it's not just in Wisconsin. I mean, you can read about it in all the major cities in the United States. But I think that even, and hopefully nobody gets upset about this, but I mean, that's, in my opinion, that's kind of like we look at the township and we look at Turner. And how did that develop? Was that was something that I think over time it's gradually changed, but that's, I think, something that was there to begin with. And I think it, you hate to say that in our community, but I think it's all part of that. And that's something that, as we see more and more change in that, I think you'll see, and I think that's a disparity of wealth in the nation as well, because it's been going back over decades, whereby wealth has not been developed, because there is wealth developed in home ownership, and that's a big part of it. Whereby if they're segregated to live in a certain part of this community, and they're not able to buy those nicer homes and pay that down and develop that wealth, I guess I don't know, I'm kind of babbling here, but
no. My point. Yeah, I mean, we have to recognize the white flight in this. And we also have to recognize historical policy in this as well. From 1934 to 1968, it was the FHA's policy not to provide home loans to African Americans. They did redline. We won't provide loans in these communities, and we won't provide loans to these people. So as other communities were building wealth and other people were building wealth, African Americans were largely shut out. Go ahead, Amy, please.
Just really quickly, I think a lot of our local history is connected to the fact that so many cities in Wisconsin were previously sundown towns, and the spillover from that. And for anyone who's not familiar with the sundown town, basically means if you were black, you were not allowed in that town after the sun went down. I mean, like places as close as Janesville, etc. So redlining and home ownership and loans and educational access and health disparities, etc. But think about, you were not allowed to be in a town before we even get to health and education and policing and all of that other stuff. Just physically not allowed to be there, or something horribly violent could happen to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were over 200 sundown towns in Wisconsin alone. And sundown towns were perfectly legal up until the Civil Rights Act of 1968. So that wasn't that long ago. You know, just because that law was passed doesn't mean that sentiment changed. There's a lot of information about the history of housing discrimination in Wisconsin, and especially information about sundown towns if people are curious. But places like Janesville and Middleton and Appleton, communities all over the state were sundown towns and had prominent signs placed in their communities when people were coming in, so that African Americans knew they were not welcome after a certain time. You could maybe come in and work in that community, but by sundown, you better be out because you're going to get arrested or accosted or worse.
Mark,
and when people think, go ahead.
Was being a sundown town, was that just for African Americans, or did that translate over into other races, whether it's Hispanic or I know for a fact that my dad was not served in, I believe, in a restaurant in Delavan because he was Asian.
Yeah, no, sundown town. A lot of sundown towns had rules against people, minorities. Period. So Asian Americans, Indigenous people, Latino, and Hispanic people, they were not allowed. Some communities allowed other minorities, and they were specifically about African Americans, but a lot of sundown towns across the country didn't want minorities, period, in their communities. So yeah, John, your point is absolutely right on. It's just the history of that hatred. You're brown, you're some shade of brown, and we don't want you. And that was, the message was very clear. We're not going to sell you. I mean, the other part of that are deed covenants. You can find people who own houses now in this community who still have those old deed covenants on their mortgages that said, I will not sell my house to a person of color or a black person or an Asian person, or the deed covenant said more specifically, I will only sell my home to another white person. So yeah, it affected minority groups across the board. I mean, we only need to look at what in terms of the treatment of Asian Americans. We only need to look at the way Chinese workers were treated in the 1880s and 1890s when they came west to work on the railroads. We only need to look at World War II and look at Japanese internment camps. I mean, we have a history of segregating people and disparaging people and discriminating against people other than the dominant culture. So thanks for bringing that up. I appreciate it. Amy, you had your hand up again. Go ahead. Oh, no. Okay. So with that, folks, we're going to take a break. I'm going to get you out of here soon. We're going to take a 10-minute break. You guys a chance to breathe, go to the bathroom. So it's 7:20. Let's everybody come back at 7:30. Okay, everyone, are we ready to jump back in? All right, so we're going to start off just to get us back in the framework. I have up on the screen some questions for self-reflection. So what I'm going to ask you to do, and if you can decide if you want to write these down or not, if you want to write down answers, or if you just want, but just going to take, I'm going to say 3 minutes just to review the questions. If you want to write down some notes for yourself, do so, but just kind of 3 minutes of self-reflection before we jump back into the rest of the last portion of the afternoon. Everybody, or the evening. Everybody ready? All right. And stop. And I'm not going to ask anybody to read anything specifically that you wrote down or that you're thinking about, but did anybody have an epiphany or an aha moment? And if so, would you be willing to share?
I'll share. I didn't just have the aha moment, but I was thinking about the first time I became aware of difference. And it was, I remember it really clearly. I was 6 and we lived in an apartment complex by my grandma when I grew up. And I pointed out once that I just noticed or something. I don't remember because I was 6, but I made some comments about having white skin. And my mom freaked out, was super embarrassed. And I didn't, I felt so deeply ashamed that memory is stayed with me 30 years later. So that's when I became embarrassed about it. And what's interesting is that we grew up in a really diverse area, and it never occurred. I mean, of course, you see clearly that our skin is different, but it never occurred to me that there was some kind of like value judgment or some kind of social stigma at all to me until I was like going to first grade.
All right. Thank you. Maria and then John. I think Maria had her hand up slightly before John did. Yep.
Thank you. So for me, there were many aha moments. When I was little, I think when around maybe 5, 6, when we first started like, having shorts and stuff like that, I noticed that there was a difference between male and female, and how females were treated or expected to do different things than males. So I always had, got to do like wash the dishes and mop the floors and sweep and like do all the house chores, while the boys didn't really have to do much because they were not old enough to work yet. So that was my first aha moment that I was different. I didn't really like, but anyhow. And then my second aha moment was when we moved to Wisconsin, and I didn't speak the language, and I come here to the United States and I see different people, different colored people, because it wasn't just, people of my color. It was like Black people and white people, something that I had not been exposed to before. So that was another aha moment. And then just, growing up as myself, having an accent and being Hispanic and not quite fitting in anywhere, that was another aha moment. So, yeah, I have had quite a few aha moments.
Thank you for sharing those. Appreciate it. John?
I would say the aha moment for me was the fourth bullet point, where it says, what was taught about my race and ethnicity as a child. And I kind of think back to my grandma, because when I was growing up, it was notorious, and I never really understood this, but it was like every Saturday, or at least it seemed like that, I would always go down to my grandma's house, and they would drop me off, and I know my mom and dad were probably going to some fundraiser or some board event or something that my dad was involved in. Yeah. And I got stuck at my grandma's house, and I probably spent more time in my grandma's house than any of my cousins ever did. And, just reflecting back on that and understanding, I didn't really understand a lot about my grandma at that point, but it was over the years that one of my aunts really got really big into our heritage. In fact, they took a trip back to China and went back to our village. So it's just kind of interesting to understand and realizing, and that kind of takes me to the next one is, how do I celebrate? I don't really celebrate our ethnic heritage much. I think my aunts and uncles probably more so, and we haven't as a family. But I would have to say, if there's one thing that I wouldn't say I celebrate, but I just kind of relish in, is the fact what they went through, the struggles that they went through, and understanding what my grandma. She was on a boat coming over from China, pregnant with my dad. I think it was like a 6-week journey or whatever. And, not even understanding the horror of that. And then, migrating to a country where you're different, you can't speak the language. And then raising kids, and then finding out your husband's killed at the age when your oldest is 14, which was my dad. But yet they raised the family, and my grandmother raised our family, entire family. And I think all but one of my cousins went to college, but they made their way through education. And I wrote it down here: through education, hard work, ethics, and respect. And I think that, and not really seeking out to say, okay, yes, give this to me, give this to me. It was just really just kind of flying under the radar. And that's what I relish in the most. And that's why even when I see kids today, the challenges that they face and what they're able to overcome and really be successful, to me, I relish in seeing those kids, and I just love it when I see it happen. So that's, I guess, my aha moments.
Well, thanks for sharing, John. Anybody else?
I think the aha moment tonight for me was when I first became aware of the difference. When I was a kid, my dad wanted me to play football, at a very young age, and I did not want to play football. And I wanted to do more like academic stuff, but because I was a boy, I was supposed to play football, and that's what he did. And even when I got old enough to like go deer hunting, I enjoyed going out into the woods and spending time with my dad and my brother. But like hunting, I just didn't want to do it. But I still got like a shotgun for my 12th birthday, and it was just expected of me. And so I think when I had some boy cousins who were right around my age too, and I had no interest in doing any of the same things they did, and I was very much closer to my girl cousins than I was my boy cousins. So I think that was when I really realized that like there was a difference there.
All right. Anyone else? I see wheels turn into. Spencer, go ahead.
There was, I think it was when I just got into middle school. Like it was like a family consumer ed class. Everyone had to take it, and they had a section on like sewing and using a sewing machine. So like practical stuff like how to fix clothes. Like if you rip a hole in a sleeve or something, you should be able to fix it. Well, I just remember there was a lot of people in that class, the guys that were like, oh, I don't have to learn this stuff. Like, it's a female thing. And it's like, it became obvious that a lot of people were uncomfortable doing that thing because it started getting associated with a certain gender. And me personally, it's like, it's a skill that you should know. And I won't say I'm in practice by any means, but at least it's something that I have some kind of knowledge about.
Spencer, I'm right there with you. I still have it to this day, the drawstring bag I made in home ec in 7th grade. Go ahead, Stephanie.
So I was thinking about that among other things, and we had to. Now I know your age, Mark, because you let it out there before. You're not too much younger than me, but we had to take home ec. We had, and we could not take industrial arts, and that irritated me. I don't want to speak ill of the home ec teacher, but I was a troublesome student because I didn't really care to learn how to make cinnamon toast, and she was very particular about things, and sewing and I were not friends, and but I had to do all that, and I didn't like it, and I did act out just a little bit, not much. But Spencer, it's kind of interesting what you said, and how things, I'm all for mixing and letting people do what they want. And because I think they are very needed skills for both sexes. And I don't think that there should be any differentiation, but, and I graduated in 1980. So it was just interesting to hear how that evolved. And the other thing I was really thinking a lot was, my grandma. So I'm German. I guess I'm predominantly German. I'm not sure now with these DNA tests, but my grandma Keller had a very thick German accent, which I adored. And she spoke fluent German. But, I don't really know much about, I couldn't even, I'm sitting here thinking I couldn't even tell you if she was first generation or second generation here. I don't know. So now I'm going to have to find out. And my dad has died, so I'll have to ask my mom. But I also remember feeling a lot of mixed feelings about being German when I watched the Holocaust. There was a series on it in high school, and I was ashamed of being German. And I could not understand, and I still struggle with that to this day, how that such an atrocity happened. So yeah, so that's just some of my thoughts I was having.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing. Anyone else? It's interesting to hear people reflect on the experiences they've had themselves, but also reflecting on heritage and history, struggles that family members have had, struggles that led us to the places that we are, opportunities and access that we had, and thinking about the fortune of some of us having access and opportunity, and then again the misfortune of others not having that same access and opportunity. But yeah, all those struggles along the way that are unique to our family's history and unique to our heritage. And so I appreciate everybody honestly diving in that way. I wasn't expecting you all to dive in that way, but my goodness, thank you. That's awesome. That's why some of this is organic, and we do it the way that we do it. But I really appreciate people sharing and reflecting and taking this seriously. So thank you to everybody, whether you spoke or not, because I saw wheels turning with everybody. So I appreciate I saw the self-reflection going on with all of you, so I appreciate that. So,
hey, Mark, could you help me out really quick, because I was having a volume issue, and so I've been playing this game for like the 5 minutes to see if I could figure out what the instructions were by what other people's responses were, and I'm not quite sure I got it.
Oh, shoot.
No,
Amy, I'm so sorry.
No.
Yeah, so the instructions were to look at the questions, take 3 minutes of self-reflection, and kind of answer the questions either in your head or write them down. And then I just asked people if they had any epiphanies or aha moments after writing down and reflecting.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry about that. I didn't know. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we are going to move, because there are a couple of things that you all touched on that I think we're going to move to a next level. So our last two major pieces of conversation, stereotypes and microaggressions. Starting with stereotypes. You see the definition on the screen. You all tell me what's a stereotype. And stop reading the screen. Tell me what your definition is.
Assumptions that you make on someone based on what you think you know about their identity or identities.
Thank you, Megan. Who else? Stereotypes.
I would say kind of the first thing that pops into your head when you see a certain person or group of people.
Excellent. What else?
I see it as you're just kind of like generalizing a person on their traits or behaviors, like just based on like how they look or act or talk.
Yep. All those are excellent. Anybody got anything else they want to add? All right. We're going to do a couple of stereotype things that I think you'll think are interesting. One, there are 4 types of people listed on this page. I'm just going to pick one. You tell me some stereotypes about that one. What about business leader? Stereotypes.
What I hear a lot as a Jewish person is that a lot of business leaders are Jewish.
Okay.
Educated.
What else we got about business? What?
Educated.
Educated.
White.
Very well off.
White, well off. Yeah, just pop them off, you guys. Just pop them off.
Assertive.
Assertive. Go ahead, John.
Clean cut.
Clean cut. All right. What about rapper?
From an urban area and probably black.
Okay, from an urban area and probably black. What else?
Musician.
Okay. What else?
Artistic.
Artistic. What's floating around in your brain when I say the word rapper?
A tilted baseball cap.
Tilted baseball cap. Okay.
Or a partier.
Hard partier.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What if? Oh, was there another? Go ahead. Terrorist.
From a less developed country, for sure.
From a less developed country.
Domestic racist.
Domestic racist. I missed one. Who was that?
It's funny, Amy and I said the opposite thing at the same time. I said foreign.
Interesting. So foreign, domestic, racist. Okay.
I think religion.
Think religion. All right.
I think also poverty.
Poverty. All right. Different political views. Switching pages. Teacher.
Educated.
Educated.
Powerful.
Powerful.
Female.
Female.
Nurturing.
Nurturing.
Kind.
So that's funny because I was going to say strict.
Strict, nurturing, kind. Okay. Those are all. All right. Bad driver.
Teenager.
Use their turn signal.
Teenagers, people who don't use their turn signal. Who else?
The elderly.
The elderly.
Rebel.
Inappropriate use of the passing lane.
Inappropriate use of passing lane. Excellent.
Illinois.
I was waiting for it. I have never done this exercise in like a decade and a half in Wisconsin. With it, no matter where in Wisconsin I've done it without somebody saying something disparaging about a driver from Illinois. It's never happened. It comes out every single time because we've all learned it, right? We grew up in Wisconsin and we grew up in southern Wisconsin. We've all learned to say negative things about people from Illinois, right? It's regional bias. We grew up with it at a very early age, and we hold on to it well into adulthood. And even though we're laughing and joking about it, we on some level, we feel like there's some semblance of truth to it. But yeah, that's a classic example of learned bias, is that regional bias that we have towards people in Illinois. Everybody who grew up in Wisconsin learned it. Yes,
And
go ahead, Stephanie.
sometimes bad drivers, they think are female. They assume are female.
Yeah, there you go. All right. What about model?
Skinny.
Skinny?
Female.
Female?
Beautiful.
Beautiful?
Perfectionist.
Wealthy. Oh, sorry.
Perfectionist? Go ahead, Megan. What'd you say?
I said wealthy.
Wealthy? All right. Interesting.
Snobby.
Snobby. All right. Part 2 of our activity. I'm using a lot of your paper, but piece of paper. This is what I'm going to ask you to do. On the next slide, I'm going to show you a list of ethnic and racial groups and cultural groups. What I'm going to ask you to do is choose 6 of those 9 groups that I have listed, and I'm going to have you write down every stereotype about that group, that each of those groups that you can think of. We're just going to take about 7 to 10 minutes to do it. So I'm going to show you the list in just a second. You're going to choose 6 of the 9 on the list, and you're going to write down every racial stereotype, every cultural stereotype you can think of, everything you've heard, everything you've seen, whatever. And as it says, don't hold back and don't worry about offending anybody. That's not what this is about. We're all adults in this circumstance. A lot of this stuff we've all heard, and some of this stuff we've said. So we are, as it says, we're identifying what you know and what you've heard, and it's not a commentary on your personal beliefs regarding a given stereotype. But these are things that a lot of us have heard, have said, and have been called. So everybody ready? Comes the list. Oops, other way. There we go. Pick 6 of those. Take about, like I said, 5 to 7 minutes. Write down as many stereotypes as you can think of about each of the groups that you choose on that list. So choose 6 to do the stereotypes.
Mark, is this any stereotype, both negative and positive?
And stereotypes, any. Yep. Yep. By the way, I recognize that the instructions say choose 3. I told you to choose 6, so choose 6. I just caught that, sorry. This is your 2-minute warning. Your 2-minute warning. 1 minute. And stop. All right. So, raise your hand if Japanese is one of the groups you chose. Okay. For those of you who chose Japanese, take a couple seconds and look at what you wrote down for that group. I'm not going to have you read them off. I just want you to pay attention to what you wrote down. How many people have Latino or Latinas on their list? Raise your hand. All right. For those of you who chose that category, take a moment, reflect on, look at what you wrote down. How many people chose women? Okay. That was one that everybody, it looks like virtually everybody in the group chose. Take a moment, review every single thing that you wrote down in terms of stereotypes about women. Law enforcement, raise your hand if you wrote down if law enforcement is one of your categories. It's another category that looks like everybody chose. Interesting. Take a look at everything that you wrote down about law enforcement. Every statement you wrote down. African Americans. Who had African Americans on the list? Maria, you were the only person? Okay. Take a second to reflect and take a look at everything that you wrote down about that group. How many of you chose teenagers? Yeah, take a couple seconds and look at what you wrote down about that group. How many people chose men? All right. Yeah, reflect for a moment. What'd you write down? What about Native Americans or indigenous people? How many people picked that group? Just one? Amy, take a moment. Reflect on what you wrote down. And then the last group that was on the list was the homeless. How many people chose that group? Take a moment and reflect. So I'm going to start this conversation with the group that's last on the list, which is our homeless population. I'm going to start it with this statement. I want you to look at again what you wrote down in terms of stereotypes and reflect on it for a second, and then think about it in this context. 40% of all the individuals who are homeless in this country at any given time are children under the age of 18. And I want you to reconcile that with what you wrote on the page. Just take a moment. And think about whether or not that fact, that data, that statistic is in any way, shape, or form reflected in what you put down in terms of your stereotypes about homeless people. As we look at what's on your page, my first question is, was that exercise easy or difficult to do in terms of coming up with the stereotypes? In terms of just generating the list, easy or difficult? Oh, go ahead, Amy.
Thank you for this exercise. It was easy, and the way I did it was I first thought of all the negative stereotypes, and then I thought about what is my experience with this group, not just the stereotype, and what are the positive stereotypes. And the overlap was interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing. Who else? Easy time generating your list, struggled with generating your list. What was it for you?
I'm just similar to Amy's. Like, it was really easy for me to come up with them, and they did tend to be negative. And so, like, I noticed that they were negative, so I started, like, alternating between negative and positive. And it was interesting for me to see which categories were more heavily stacked with negative.
Excellent.
Similarly on experience, yeah.
Thank you. Stephanie, go right ahead.
I kind of had a hard time. And then it's interesting because one group in particular, only one of the groups are all positive.
Interesting. Okay. Anyone else? Easy, difficult in terms of coming up with your list?
For me, it's kind of like how Megan and Amy said, like, you start thinking of kind of like the negative, like you think of negatives usually first, and it's kind of bad that people kind of default to negatives first. And then you see that in yourself, and you're like, okay, like you want to try thinking of the positives to it, and I think a lot of people focus on the negatives way too much. When like that's the way I kind of saw it, as like we focus on the negatives way too much instead of trying to like look for the good things. But I mean, stereotypes aren't really a thing that we should be viewing as a good or a bad thing, because you're setting an expectation or a standard for someone to achieve or not.
Thanks, Spencer. Absolutely. Go ahead, John.
I didn't think it was real hard. What I really tried to do is, as soon as I would read it off, I'd think about somebody that I know or people that I know that fit this specific category, and just try to think of them and what I think of them as a person, and positive and negative. I didn't really kind of focus on one negative or positive trait at all. Just how, not only how I view it, but the stereotypes that are out there.
Mm-hmm. Amy, is your hand up again? Okay. So my other question to you about this, and think about it for a moment, is where did that information that you wrote down on the pages come from? And then give me an answer. Where did that info come from? Where did that list of stuff come from?
What you hear, what you read, what you experience, you're like, yep, that resonated with me, or that wasn't my experience, but I always hear that. That's where it came from me.
Okay. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Predominantly other people that are that are friends or acquaintances, etc.
Mm-hmm. Megan?
One thing that I had to one thing that I kind of had to reflect on, the most prominent ones were teenagers and law enforcement, is what institutionally things said about themselves. So like when I was writing about teenagers, that was really true. I chose that one on purpose because I thought it would challenge me because I teach high school. And of course I say like all the positive, wonderful things, but I have to be honest with myself about the negative stereotypes that exist about teenagers. And then I was like reflecting on how institutionally school is structured in a way around those negative stereotypes, and how law enforcement is structured in a way that ignores some stereotypes. And I just thought that was kind of interesting.
Anyone else?
For me, it was, what you hear from others, my experiences, just listening to people, reading, in books, magazines, listening to the news sometimes, because there's a lot of, I think stereotypes are like everywhere. Just doing a little self-reflection too of, the thoughts that come to you from what I have been taught to, or from what I have learned, as I've grown.
Yep. Excellent. Thank you. So the thing that I want, in this instance, the thing that I want you all to think about is, remember that no other people are in the room with us that are participating in this. There's no friends, no family, no other people, no other influences, no TV, no nothing. In this moment, when you were generating those lists, those words came from one place and one place only. All of that came from your head. All of that came from your brain. That means all of that stuff is where? In your head, in your brain. And all I did was put some words on a PowerPoint slide and tell you to go. And one of you earlier on hit the nail on the head, and I can't remember which one of you it was, but when we figured out, I want to give you credit, when you talked about, when somebody said, what happens when that person walks in the room? Because if words on a page trigger what you wrote down, what happens when that human being walks into your room? All of those things go flooding through your mind as well. That's where we go back to the beginning of, if you think you are without bias, you're lying to yourself. Because what you just wrote down is all stuff that influences and impacts. Those stereotypes, although you may not believe in them, although you may not aspire to them, although your conscious mind doesn't agree with them, subconsciously, it's all sitting right here. And it's triggered very, very easily. Again, this was just words on the page. So when that human being walks into the room and those things are triggered in your mind, it also impacts the way that you see that person, and on some level, the way that you treat that person. The focus of this is to make sure that we are very clearly aware of these stereotypes and very clearly aware of our bias. Because if I'm aware of something, I can combat it. I can refute it. It's the stuff that lingers in the subconscious that we want to continue to work to bring forward so that it is not negatively impacting the people we're interacting with, whether it's students or parents or each other. But everything that you wrote on those pages resonates on some level with you. And we have to, again, as I said, keep saying, so much of this is about self-awareness, self-discovery, and self-reflection. Understanding what's up here and how it translates into what comes out of here and how we treat people. That list, those lists that you made, critically important to understanding this work. All of that stuff lingers in your brain. It lingers in our brains too. And although we always like to think of ourselves, as good-hearted, well-intentioned people who would never purposely discriminate against or disparage against anybody, especially people who do what we do. The reality of it is we have to understand that good-hearted and well-intentioned and culturally competent are two very different things. Good-hearted and well-intentioned is a nice start. It's a really good beginning. But there's a long way between good-hearted and well-intentioned and culturally competent and culturally aware. And the biggest piece of that is self-awareness. Again, my values, my beliefs, my experiences, my expectations, and how I view the world and how I view myself. That list says something about who you are, what you think, what you feel, what you see, and on some level, what you believe. The next step in that is when those stereotypes and when that bias creeps into your brain, how do you stop yourself? How do you catch yourself when you're triggered, when somebody walks into the room? And how do you give that person, again, an opportunity to show you who they are as opposed to you assigning it to them? Because when we deal in stereotypes, that's what we're doing. We're assigning an identity to a person as opposed to giving them a chance to show us their actual identity. And because we do that, we then treat that person based on the identity we assign them, which in a lot of cases may have no basis in the reality of who that person actually is. That's our stuff that we're laying on somebody else based on one aspect of their intersectionality. And one aspect of their intersectionality that still may not fit your stereotype of race, of gender, of age, etc. Good stuff, everybody. All right, everybody ready for our last section? All right, let's move.
Mark, I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Oh, good.
Can I quick ask a question?
Yes, please.
How does all that tie in with what you were saying to first impressions of a person? You know, I was listening to you say, you know, to know your triggers, and you know, it's almost like we're preconditioned when we see someone that we initially make a snap judgment. I mean, if John, can I use you as an example for a moment?
I'm an easy target.
Well, here's a good-looking, well-dressed, you know, man. I'm going to make an assumption whether I like it or not. I mean, I'm just trying to be real here and think this through. What you're saying. I'm going to make an assumption on the spot about John. Now, if I would see another man, a homeless man, or someone on the street asking for money, I'm going to make an assumption right away there too. I'm going to think, did this man land on really bad times, or is this guy panhandling? You know, I mean, it's stuff that, I mean, how do you deal with that?
So, Stephanie, your statement is absolutely true, because the assumption piece of that, we do it. It's second nature. We inherently make that judgment about people. We walk into a room, we see somebody, and we start building a story. It's like when we're people watching. You start people watching, and you start building a story about somebody based on nothing other than what you can tell just by looking at them. Very surface level stuff. 3% of that human being. And then we take that surface level stuff that we see and we equate that to substantive things based on our experiences and based on what we think we know. But the stuff that we think we know in our experiences may not relate at all to that person. So what we have to be conscious of is when we're making those blank statements about that person or those assumptions, is stopping ourselves. And then taking the next step and finding out, yes, John is a handsome, well-groomed young man, but John could be an idiot. Or John could be and John is not, or John could be a serial killer. You know, or John could be the smartest person on the planet, and the person who's gonna cure cancer and HIV. But you won't know any of those substantive things about John until you take the step of finding out about John, which means connecting to John and asking questions of John. I can get out of my stereotypes and get out of my assumptions when I take the logical step of actually engaging with the person and asking them questions. Then I know truth about John. And then I can let my stereotypes go. I don't have to dwell on stereotypes anymore because I know the reality. I've known John for years. Yes, John is smart and handsome and good looking, but John's also a good dude who does a lot of great stuff in this community. Well, but I know those things. It's not an assumption because we have a relationship and connection. From a distance, I don't know what I thought about John when I met John 11 years ago, but I'm sure I stereotyped him, and I'm sure he stereotyped me before we got to know each other. But now I don't have to deal in that any longer because I know something. The next step is always when we have that opportunity to interact with somebody, to work on letting go of our assumptions and our stereotypes and find out the truth. And in those moments where it's a new coworker walking into your building, where it's a new student walking into your classroom, where it's a new teacher or administrator or board member, those moments where you have the opportunity to let go of the stereotype and find out the reality, we have to take advantage of. And we often don't because the stereotype is comfortable. Because the stereotype speaks to what our values and our beliefs and what we think we know. So we linger in the stereotype because it feels good. And stepping outside of that feels a little scary. The coaching that I'm doing with you all is encouragement to step outside of the thing that feels safe and comfortable and actually seek reality and seek the truth. It's hard to walk up to a stranger and build a connection. But once you do, they're a stranger no longer. Megan, I don't know whose hands were up before. There were several hands are up. I don't know if it was John or Megan or Amy. I don't know who came up, but whatever order you all want to go in.
Amy is first.
Okay. You're still muted.
You're muted.
Okay. Thank you. So I just wanted to add 3 things to the list really quick that I attempt to be intentional about. So the first one is confession. I enjoy people watching and it's lots of fun. So leave me alone with my people watching and my assumptions. But when it comes to interactions, I always like to assume positive intent until I have reason to believe otherwise. But start off with assuming positive intent. And then number 2 for me is to be secure enough to be wrong. Perfectly comfortable with that. And then the third one is if I do find out that I'm right, have enough patience and elasticity to ask myself, which I don't always, I'll just be clear, how did that become the reality? Or why is this situation like that? So those are my 3 things.
I'm not going to take your people watching away from you all. It's fun. We all do it. No, I thank you for that, Amy. Thanks for sharing that. Was it John next or Megan next? John?
I'll go. Mine's short and sweet. It's just commenting about what your comments were as a follow-up to what Stephanie had mentioned. And I think really what it comes down to is what I gathered from that is being approachable and also willing to approach. And I think that, willing to, and I always comment, and it's been said before, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, so listen twice as much as you talk. But I think you have to be willing to share with others as well as having them share with you.
Yep. Yeah, somewhere along the way we became afraid of each other, and I don't know why that is. We're human beings. Walk up to a person and say hello. And so the shortest distance between 2 people is asking that person their name. Go ahead, Megan.
No, I appreciate what both of you said, and yeah, actually, that's what I was going to say. The first thing Amy said is I was going to say that I try to walk into situations assuming the best. But one thing that I was going to share too that has to do with kind of stereotypes and assumptions is something that I've personally allowed to minimize my voice or change or feed into insecurities about who I am or how I'm presenting is making assumptions about how other people think of me based on the stereotypes I have of them. And that's something that, as a teacher, I try to point out to my students, too, because, I feel like a lot of times, we disempower ourselves based on our assumptions. But, yeah, I really appreciate what both of you shared.
Excellent. Thank you, Megan. Maria and then Stephanie.
I am still, wowed that watching people is a thing. Yeah, I'm like, what? But just thinking about it, I guess it would be kind of interesting. Anyhow, I do appreciate, what both Amy and Megan said about like giving the benefit of the doubt to everyone. And I think that's one of my characteristics as far as just seeking to understand, where people are coming from in a manner that is respectful. I think I really try to see the positive in everything, but sometimes my perceptions win me over, and I might not give that full benefit of the doubt. So, I don't know. I hope that there's some type of just guidance, on how to overcome that. Or it could be a personality thing too. So, but I do appreciate what both Megan and Amy stated.
Yeah, and I appreciate your honesty about that, because I think it's that the struggle between perception and reality is real. Because we will even say it, perception is reality. No, perception is perception. Reality is reality. Reality is the truth. Perception is the spin we put on it to make it fit into our box. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Sorry, Mark, I didn't. I
Okay. That's all right. All right. Last big concept of the day. Excellent work, everybody. I appreciate you. Microaggressions. I'm not going to go through all these slides about microaggressions. I'm simply going to say this. Microaggressions are verbal or nonverbal slights directed at individuals because of whatever, race, gender, ethnicity, age, whatever. I don't like you because I don't like the shirt you have on today. And sometimes they're verbal and very direct. Sometimes they're indirect and nonverbal. Sometimes they're passive aggressive. The thing we need to understand about microaggressions, and you all read the article, is that these are things and interactions that we do to each other and experience from each other multiple times a day, every day. The article that you all read, Microaggressions in Everyday Life, was the article that really changed our whole culture at Community Action, because we were trying to figure out for years what that thing was we were doing to each other. And then we read that article and it had a definition and a name, and then we started to address it. And it totally changed the dynamic of the way that we treated each other and the way that we interacted with each other. And in some ways, the way that we treated and interacted with our participants. But it's recognizing what they are, when they're coming, and then also not being afraid to say ouch and calling people out on it. So for this last section, I'm going to share with you some examples of some racial or cultural microaggressions that some young people have experienced. And the reason why we're doing this again in this context is because I want you to think about the young people walking through the hallways at the schools in Blue Light every single day and thinking about some of them experiencing these things. And also some of these things you all may relate to in experiences that you've had as youth and adults. So here we go. First one. So what do you guys speak in Japan? Asian? Yeah, because that's a language. But that stereotype about, I'm going to group you. And then what are you? Being biracial doesn't make me a what? Biracial kids experience so much discrimination and bias from peers, from adults, because often they're mistreated or disrespected or disparaged by both or multiple groups that they belong to. You're not black enough, you're not white enough, you're not Hispanic enough, you're not Asian enough. Or you're too much and you get isolated. Or biracial kids often get mistaken for other races or ethnicities. One of my best friends in high school, his mom was Irish and his dad was Filipino. And people would always try to figure out what my friend's ethnicity was. And they would treat him accordingly to what ethnicity they thought he was. If they thought he was black, he got treated a certain way. If they thought he was Latino, he got treated a certain way. And if they thought he was Asian, he got treated a certain way. And all of those were very different. And I remember observing that all through school, middle school and high school, with the way that he was treated. But if somebody would have just asked him, he would have told them, my mom's Irish and my dad's Filipino. But it was interesting to watch people assume and then treat him based on those assumptions. I mean, there were times, honestly, where he got called the N-word more than I did. So, next slide. So, like, what are you? Again, that kind of disparaging of biracial youth. Courtney, I never see you as a black girl. What do you see her as? She says, open your eyes. You don't act like a normal black person. What does that mean? Translation, you are not acting like the stereotype in my mind of what a black person is supposed to be like. Very different than you don't act like a black person. As I said, race is a somewhat loose binder. Is there a certain way a black person is supposed to act, or a white person is supposed to act, or an Asian person is supposed to act? 2008 presidential election, not to get political. Remember when we were having the national debate over whether or not Barack Obama was black enough? Remember when that was going on CNN and MSNBC? People were actually on national television talking about whether or not he was black enough. What we were actually talking about was Barack Obama does not fit our stereotype of what a black person in America is supposed to be like, and it messed with our bias and our bigotry. It was far more a commentary on us than it ever was on him. He was living his life as a black man in America the way that he did every day. It was our issue. We were the ones with the issue, not him. This next one, just because I'm Mexican, that doesn't mean I should be the automatic choice for the role of Dora the Explorer in the high school skit. We're going to pigeonhole you. You can't be anybody else. When people think it's weird that I listen to Carrie Underwood. You don't speak Spanish? Well, you're brown and you're from one of those places, aren't you? You look like it. Shouldn't you speak it? You're not really Asian. What does that mean? What does it mean to be really Asian? No, you're white. You're just white. There's nothing interesting about your cultural heritage. You're just white. So what does your hair look like today? She said as she pulled off my hat without my permission. It's okay to have curiosity about other races and ethnicities and cultures, but it's not okay to invade somebody's personal space. If you're curious, ask questions. I remember being in a situation once with a young lady who had never, she was from like Idaho or something. She had never been around black people before, but she had all these stereotypes and misconceptions about black people. We were at like the World Affairs seminar in high school, and we were white or something. But I remember her asking if she could touch my skin and she could touch my hair, because she was told that black people our skin was different. Actually, I think what she was told was something really bad, was like our skin felt like snake skin or something, and that our hair was odd. But she had asked to touch my skin and touch my hair because she had been told disparaging things about black people. But she was having this experience at this place where it seemed like none of the stereotypes she had learned were true. The next one. This girl sitting next to me moves to sit closer to someone she's talking to, and this white guy whispers loudly that she moved because I smell like rice. Really? The limited representation of my race in your classroom does not make me the voice of all black people. If you ever in your life, if you ever have started a sentence with, well, my black friend said, or my white friend said, or my gay friend said, or my Asian friend said, I'm going to forgive you because we have not had this conversation before. But moving forward, if you ever in the history of your life start a conversation with that statement again, you and I are going to have a problem. Because I need you to understand that that one black friend you have, or one white friend, or one gay friend you have, is not a spokesperson for that entire group of people. They are only speaking for themselves, their individual experience. And even if they tell you themselves that they're speaking for an entire group of people, understand that they are not speaking for an entire group of people. They're speaking they're speaking on their own individual experiences, being whatever they are that they are. Do not take it as the gospel, and do not think you're going to win an argument with it because my one black friend said something. Also, if you need to start a sentence with my one black friend or my one gay friend or my one Hispanic friend, you need more friends. Get more. But that should never be the place. Nobody should be assumed to be the spokesperson for an entire group of people, and nobody should be put in a position where they feel like they have to speak for an entire group of people. That is a lonely, horrible position to be in. To feel like you're in a space where you have to defend an entire race of people, and everybody's hanging on the word that you're saying. We put kids and adults of color, especially, in that situation far too often. And mainly because we don't put enough people of color in the room. Next up, so you're Chinese, right? Of course you are, and you speak Asian. Unbelievable. When I gave a speech about racism, the MC introduced me as Jaime Garcia. My name is Jaime Rodriguez. Not all Latinos have the last name Garcia, or Rodriguez for that matter. When standing next to my mom, why is your daughter so white? She's supposed to be green with pink polka dots? Can you read this? He showed me a Japanese character on his phone. What if I'm Cambodian or Laotian or South Korean or North Korean? What if I am Japanese American, but I don't speak Japanese? Why are you making those assumptions about me? And did you ask me my racial, ethnic, or cultural origin before you shoved this thing in my face? Next up, why do you sound white? What does white sound like? That is an experience that's something that I've dealt with my entire existence. You're so clean and articulate. You speak so well. I do public speaking for a living. What do you expect? Do you not expect me to sound a certain way? My favorite life experience, my favorite professional experience, the time that I met a donor from Community Action who had only heard me on the phone, who when I met her in person, looked at me and said, and I quote, "You tricked me, you didn't sound black on the phone." Exactly. Awesome. One of the reasons why I always tell that story is to let people know that people of difference or people of color experience weird, odd, unusual stuff all the time. Like, I don't have to make up or embellish stories because people say weird, odd, sometimes blatantly racist stuff to me all the time. And as I've gotten older, I've gotten much better at responding to it and processing it. Because I could be angry all day if I wanted to be. But what do you do when somebody looks at you and says, what am I supposed to say? Exactly. You're really pretty for a dark-skinned girl. Can't she just be really pretty? Colorism is a really interesting dynamic because often there's just as much bias within cultures and communities as there is between cultures and communities. Whether that's racial or ethnic or cultural. Like I said, those groups being gay is a loose binder for folks. There's a whole bunch of discrimination in the LGBTQ community that falls around gender identity and falls around race. There's a whole bunch of discrimination between races. Light skin and dark skin stuff is real and it's global. People in Pakistan buying their daughters lightening creams because applying lightening creams to their children because if their daughters are lighter skinned, they'll be treated better and marry better. The paper bag test that African Americans used to do in the Deep South. If you brought a date home that was darker than a brown paper bag, that date was out. Because the lighter skinned you were, the better you were going to be treated. And if you're biracial and you're light skinned enough, especially in the Jim Crow South, if you could pass for white, you did so to avoid the discrimination of Jim Crow. In places in Central and South America, it goes on. In places like Brazil and the Dominican Republic and in Mexico. In Asian countries, in Japan and in China and in Korea. The lighter skinned you are, the better you're treated. The more likely you are you're on television. The more likely you are you're celebrated. Google, I want you all, if you get a moment this evening or tomorrow, Google a picture of Sammy Sosa, circa 2020. You all remember Sammy Sosa from 1998 when he was doing the baseball thing with Mark, when he was doing the home run thing with Mark McGwire. Sammy Sosa and his wife, over the years, have invested in cosmetic companies and promote skin lightening creams. Google a picture of Sammy Sosa 1988. Google a picture of Sammy Sosa 2020. Sammy Sosa is now pink because he believes that if he's lightening his skin, he is bettering or lightening the race. And so they preach this throughout Central America and throughout the Dominican Republic, that people need to lighten their skin because they will be treated better and receive better. My best friend, who is South Korean American, but lived in the United States since she was 2. When her and her family go to South Korea, she and her sister are considered ugly because they tan and they're darker skinned. And she's gorgeous. So I don't know what their problem is. But all of those things, those biases, those stereotypes that play between cultures and within cultures, that we've all taught each other over time, and that we've all learned over time, that we have to be conscious of letting go. And two more things. One, when you're the person on the end of committing a microaggression, first and foremost, if you say it, take responsibility for it. If it came out of your mouth, it's yours. Secondly, as we were talking about intent earlier, understand that intent does not equal impact. I could care less what your intent does. We're going to focus on the impact. If the impact of what you said or the impact of what you did harm that person in some way, that's what we are going to address, the impact. The truth of the matter is, I don't know what your intentions were or not. You can tell me to your blue in face you didn't intend to, but maybe you did, maybe you didn't. But I don't have time to sit with you for 3 hours and argue intent. Yes, you did, no, you didn't, yes, you did, no, you didn't. Your intent is irrelevant. What's relevant is that you harm me, and we're going to address that. Next, manage your feelings of defensiveness. So when somebody calls you out on something and they tell you that they say, ouch, our tendency is to get defensive because we want to explain ourselves. Drop that inclination and pay attention. The moment our defenses go up and we start formulating our defense in our brains, we stop paying attention to what the other person is saying. Drop it, pay attention, actively listen, as we were talking about before. Reflect on what was heard and the message sent. I said this, it landed for you in this way. I'm sorry that it landed for you in that way. I've acknowledged what I've said, I've acknowledged how you heard it, and I've apologized for how it landed. Guess what I can do now? Or what we can both do? We can move on. Because we've dealt with it. It's over. We can be adults and let it go. Don't try to prove your viewpoint or how much of a racist or a sexist or a bigot you're not. Well, I'm not a racist. I would never say anything like that. I'm not a sexist. That's not what I'm saying to you. I'm not calling you a racist or a sexist. What I'm saying is that the thing that came out of your mouth is racist or sexist. And we are dealing with the thing that came out of your mouth. So we're going to address the thing that came out of your mouth, not label you anything, and then we are going to move on once we've addressed the thing that came out of your mouth. I'm good. You're good. We can move forward. It takes adults to do that because it takes practice to do that. Because it means I'm going to actively listen. It means I'm going to let go of my defenses, but it also means I'm going to have the courage to say ouch when something sticks me. It means that I am not going to hold it inside for the next 7 years and hold a grudge against somebody and they have no idea why. We are going to put on our big person pants and we are going to be adults and we're going to address the circumstance as the circumstance arises. And then once we've addressed the circumstance, we are going to let it go. And we are going to move forward. Because I'm not going to hold that over your head for the next decade either. Remember that time back in 1977 when you said blah, blah, blah? 2020, let it go. We move forward. We all make mistakes. We're all going to say things and do things in this process that potentially are going to offend someone. It's part of the learning. We have to have the courage to make mistakes, and people on the other side have to have the grace to allow people to make mistakes. Now, mistakes are different than blatant, overt racism and bigotry, so let's not get the two confused. And we're all smart enough, mature enough to know the difference. But regardless, when it comes out of your mouth, I'm going to call you on it, and we are going to address it. The very last piece. We've all been in situations where people have said something biased or bigoted. And in those circumstances, we've said nothing. Or we've done that nervous laughter thing. And then, guess what? That person gets validated because nobody corrected them. So that person goes on and does it again, and says it again, and does it again, and says it again. Because nobody corrected that person, even though we know we should have and we know that it's not right. For some reason, we understand this with kids, but we don't understand this with adults, and we got to, and that is this statement. Behavior that goes unchallenged goes unchanged. When we want to change the conduct of or the behavior of a child, we challenge it and we correct it. For some reason, we won't apply that to adults. The same thing applies. When you want to change the behavior of a conduct of an adult, you challenge it and you correct it. But as long as behavior goes unchallenged, it goes unchanged. Until somebody shows me that it's wrong, I'm going to keep doing so. John, go ahead.
Maria, did you have your hand up?
Oh, I didn't know if yours were old or new. Okay.
No, a question on that. As far as challenging people, kind of goes back to what I talked about earlier as far as what happens, what about a situation whereby you're in a situation with individuals and you know that that person is not going to change. You know that regardless of what you might say and do, I mean, yes, you can say something, but it might turn into a conflict that, okay, yeah, I don't know if I want to go down that road. And maybe they're not really a close friend of yours. I mean, is that really worthy of, okay, let's get into a big argument about this right now because I really don't care because you're not going to change your way, and therefore, why should I waste my time?
Valid. I think what you have to gauge is what are you willing to live with and what are you willing to accept? Because that, and again, it's about you. Because in that circumstance, even though that person may not change or that person may go down a path that you don't want, if somebody says something that I just can't sit on, I can't go home in good conscience and let it go. Somebody says something racist or biased or bigoted, I can't. So it really comes down to what we are willing to accept and what we can accept. And it doesn't mean that we have to get into some long-winded argument. It can be as simple as, I don't appreciate you using that kind of language around me, and I ask you not to do it again. I don't appreciate that comment, and I ask you not to do it again. And we're going to leave the conversation there. But I can't, in good faith, let that person say something around me that I know that shouldn't be said, because what that says to me and to them is I give them the green light to say it to somebody else. And what I will say to you is that in that circumstance, that person is going to think twice about saying it again, at least around you. And sometimes that's enough. It's in the silence that we continue to perpetuate the issue. But again, it's what you're willing to live with. I can't. I'm 48 years old, and I've dealt with, John, I'm sure you have too, dealt with racism every day of my entire life. And I've just reached a point where I'm too old and I've done too much in my life and I do too much in this community to tolerate it. I don't have to. I give too much to this community to tolerate that kind of chaos around me. I do too much in this community to tolerate. I sacrifice too much for the people, for the folks in this community to deal with that anymore. When I'm in a space where I want to feel safe and comfortable and somebody invades that space and makes it feel unsafe, I have a right to take my safety back. And if that person gets upset, more power to them. Push on. Just get out of my space. You can say what you want to say and believe what you want to believe, but when you invade my personal space and you upset my serenity, you best believe I'm coming back at you because I've earned the right to do so. Who else had there? I just saw a hand go up. Was that Maria? Go ahead.
I think Megan was first.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. No, it's hard to see everybody's stuff. I guess I was just going to say, so I think that everything that we do or don't do, like, leaves an impact. And I guess as a teacher, something that I've had a lot of really intentional conversations with, like, students and with myself about is that, like, we're all works in progress. And I'm sure all of us have known someone or been in experience with somebody at some point where you thought this person is for sure this way, but then they ended up surprising you and changing over time. And I think we have to accept that growth, takes time. And so, like, something, I know I've struggled with that too, John, because it can be embarrassing. You could feel like you're violating a norm. There's a ton of social pressure, and it's a struggle that I'm actively having, like, all the time. It's a big dialogue going on in my mind a lot, especially lately. And I think the thing you have to remember is like, even if you put yourself out there in the moment and you experience that discomfort, but you know that what you're doing is right by challenging that, that person's not going to change in that moment. But who knows, like 2 years, 5 years down the road, like, experiences and reactions accumulate. And I think too that we owe it to, like, the people around us, to be part of that, because, like, it removes some of that social pressure that that you're feeling that makes you not want to say something. If other people start to kind of chip away at this expectation that people just, like, stay silent with somebody they view as, like, bullheaded or whatever. So I just want to empathize deeply with what you said, but also just kind of put that perspective out there, I guess.
No, excellent. Thank you. And go ahead, Maria.
So I just had a comment about that too. Working with people, I mean, I oversee over 120 people, over 7 different counties. And, having that power also, I think, puts me in a position where I have to be vulnerable as well. So I always open the door to, if I'm going to be calling you off on something, I have to be open to on people calling me off as well, and accepting that I am not perfect, that I make mistakes too. I do have, biases that maybe sometimes, I'm not aware of. So if I'm going to be calling on someone, I have to be open-minded too, to accept that the same thing can happen to me too.
So, did I miss anybody's hand? So, I want you to think about this silence and acceptance piece because I want to bring this full circle back to children. Think about the 4th of July picnic or the Christmas thing or the holiday meal or the wherever you're at, and Aunt so-and-so or Uncle somebody or Grandpa Joe or whoever says something biased or bigoted or sexist, and everybody in the room says nothing. All the kids heard it, but none of the adults corrected it. Other than somebody probably saying, oh, well, that's just Uncle Joe, or that's just Aunt so-and-so, or that's just Grandma, as if those people aren't able to learn. We make excuses for people because we don't want to challenge them to learn something. Everybody can learn something. And then you fast forward a couple hours and everybody's left your event, your picnic, whatever, and your son, your daughter, your grandson, your granddaughter, your niece, your nephew comes up to you and they repeat the exact same thing that your aunt or your uncle or your niece or whoever said. And the adult in you says, you shouldn't say that, or you can't say that, or that's wrong for you to say. And so we explain it to the child while it's wrong for them to say. And then kid logic kicks in. And kid logic says, well, if it's okay for Aunt Frances to say it and you didn't say anything about it being wrong, why isn't it okay for me to say it? The messages that we send are critically important. Youth Development 101. Kids are always listening and paying attention, especially when adults think they're not listening and paying attention. So in those moments where you think your kids aren't listening or aren't watching or aren't doing so, they're absolutely doing so. Kids are scientists and we're their experiment. They learn how to navigate the world through us. So if we want to make sure that we're not passing bias, bigotry, racism, stereotypes onto our children, we need to be courageous in those moments, even when we think our kids are not listening, to correct the people around us so that our kids understand. Bias and stereotypes and racism get passed on generation to generation to generation, family to family to family, person to person. It's how we grow up learning it. We've learned it from the adults around us. So if it's not corrected in us, it gets passed on to our kids, who then keep passing it on. If we want to be a cog in this wheel, we can't be silent. We got to stop worrying about the reactions to it. Everybody in this group, especially this group, has a sphere of influence. And in that sphere of influence, people respect you, admire you, and appreciate you. And when you use your voice to speak out against these things, the folks around you are listening and paying attention. You better believe it. We all have a sphere of influence that we can impact discrimination. It's whether or not we choose it for that purpose. But we use our sphere of influence for a whole lot of other stuff. Why are we always afraid to use it about this issue? And with that, folks, it is 8:58. So I'm going to see if there's any last-minute questions or statements. Otherwise, I'm going to say, my goodness, thank you all for agreeing to participate in this. I hope everybody in the community appreciates and sees and understands the honesty, the openness, the conversation, the dialogue that we began tonight, and that people have a different level of respect and appreciation for engaging in this conversation in this way in front of an entire community. I know that I can't thank you enough for allowing me to be a part of it. So I really appreciate all of you for being honest, open, and engaged and being your authentic selves during this process tonight. So, and I'm looking forward to future engagements. But I want to open it up to see if there's anything that anybody wants to say kind of in closing. Otherwise, we'll say good night. Go ahead, Stephanie.
I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Have a good evening. We appreciate everything you do for the kids and the families in this community. Take care.
Thank you very much
Have a good
again,
night.
Mark. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I don't think we have a quorum, so I think we're adjourned. So we'll call that.
That's the quorum.
Oh, there is a quorum. Thanks for counting.
Yeah.
I can't see myself. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, a second to adjourn. Any other questions or discussion? See none, all in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
You too.